Welcome to the Origin Canine podcast, where we speak to authentic and inspiring voices from the working canine world. Listen to this episode, subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media, and go to origincanine.com. Enjoy the show. G'day guys, welcome to another episode of the Origin Canine podcast. Mate, this is the podcast that was never supposed to happen, but we made it happen.
Yeah.
And dude, I'll introduce you first. We've got Colton, Clemens here today, former Marine Corps canine handler, and then State Department contractor, also canine handler. A few deployments to the Middle East, which we're going to get into, and now legit cowboy, like an actual cowboy. So definitely, I got some real dumbass questions about that one too, man. So stand by.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on your podcast here. I'm glad we finally got to make it work. It was a lot of you kind of caught me at a bad time. We're calving over here in Montana in the United States. And my boss is kind of a late calver, so been helping him pop some babies out of cows and late nights and everything. But yeah, the hours just weren't lining up because you're in Australia and I'm in Montana. So glad we finally got it able to connect.
And dude, the time converter thing, I was like, what are you doing, computer? Are you really fucking me here?
I finally saw it today in the link. It didn't post it at the bottom. It actually just has like a URL link at the top that says this is your tool to convert the time. And I never saw it before. So that's probably my bad also.
No, I actually added it after. So we had this chat. We tried to do the conversion like a couple of monkeys and then didn't get it. And then I was like, I just Googled converter and then after I put it on there. So
right on. Cool.
Dude, I got the first dumb question, man, and then I'll start. I've got some serious questions for you. So
sure thing.
Is it Montana or Montana? Does that matter?
Did you ask if it's Montana or pronounced a different way or?
Yeah.
Just Montana. It's the origin of the word is actually Spanish for mountain. So when the conquistadors first came into, the Yucatan Peninsula and they were bringing horses here and spreading, their culture and Christianity, et cetera, like coming up even this far up into the, North America, they named it Montana, which is Spanish for mountain. So, cause there's so many mountains here.
Yeah. Sweet. Okay. And the reason I ask is because I've had this conversation with a few people. We watch that Yellowstone show, obviously.
Yeah, no, it's actually kind of funny that you mentioned that. So that place I was telling you about that I'm actually going to go work this summer, I will actually be in Darby, Montana, which is where the show is recorded. So I've actually been to the Yellowstone Ranch several times. I know a few people that own it. It's actually called the Chief Joseph Ranch. And so I know a bunch of folks that actually own the property right behind that. So usually in the show, when you're looking at the barn and it has a little Y on it, all that land behind them they actually own. So I've ridden horses back there a bunch of times and played around with some elk and whatnot. So it's a really neat area. But anyways, I'm working in that valley for the summer for the Forest Service. And it's called the Bitterroot Valley. And then that specific section I'm working there is called the West Fork of the Bitterroot. So I'll actually be tucked right up in there in that big mountain range behind there.
Nice, yeah. Because when I jokingly said, I've seen Yellowstone, I know all about cowboying and ranching or whatever. I didn't know you were like actually because it didn't connect to me that Montana was actually where Yellowstone's filmed. So that's pretty cool, man.
It is, yeah. Some of it's filmed in Wyoming, I think, also, but predominantly it's all filmed in Montana and stuff like that. So that's it's had some negative effects and good effects, whatever. I think our economy has kind of gone a little bit better for it, but I've also think that like our housing market kind of crashed. So, but things are starting to level out and whatnot now. But yeah, I actually just got into cowboying probably around 3 years ago. But I grew up working horses and stuff like that, and then with my mom. And then when I chose to join the Marines, I was looking at any jobs that involved working with animals, and so the major one that really kind of caught my eye was working with dogs. And so after I joined the Marines at 17, I worked with dogs pretty much for the rest of my adult life until I moved here to Montana and then got back into horse training and stuff and working with cows.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that, man. I want to like touch on your childhood a bit. Just hit me with where you grew up and then how you got into the horses and stuff when you were so young.
Yeah, sure thing. So I was born in Scottsdale, Arizona. So just big desert country, back in 92. So and Arizona back then in the 90s was so much different than it is now. It was totally where I grew up in Cave Creek was all ranches. It wasn't developed like it is now. It's all golf courses and subdivisions and nice big mansions and stuff like that. But back then in the 90s, it was all just ranches. And so my mom, um, she worked on a pretty much like a dude ranch. So it's like a guest ranch, but it was a Western attraction. And my mom actually was a stagecoach driver. So like, you see in the movies, like people with the stagecoach and they're driving, a six mule team or something like that. My mom did that like for the amusement park. And then she kind of cowboyed part time and stuff like that. And so then my parents got divorced when I was probably 6. And then we moved to Colorado, and we lived in a little town called La Vita. It was just south of Colorado Springs, and my mom worked for a ranch there for about a year. And that was when I first kind of got around horses big time. Grew up with horses like ever since I was a kid. There's pictures of me like still in a diaper, like riding a mule and stuff. It's hilarious. And anyways, yeah, we ended up in Colorado. My mom worked a ranch there, and then we left Colorado, and we moved to Tennessee on the East Coast. And I grew up mostly in East Tennessee from 6 to my adult life. And yeah, I did a lot of different styles of horsemanship there. So primarily I worked in Western, like Western pleasure and dressage. And then I actually switched over to English for a few years. So I did hunter jumper for 4 years, which is, if you watch the Olympics and stuff, it's like, when they jump the jumps and whatnot. So I did that for about 4 years as well, and just kind of rounded out my horsemanship. But growing up in East Tennessee, I was raised around a lot of animals, had chickens and dogs and horses and goats and all that stuff. And so, lots of responsibility at a young age working with horses, especially. And then one day in high school, I was a junior, I think, and I was kind of majoring in like criminal justice at the time. I had college credits for that in high school, and it was my third year. It was my second year in criminal justice. And this is the one day that kind of like shaped my adult career, to decide to be a dog handler. And one of the law enforcement canines came in, and they did kind of like an on-job training day, and they were talking about it and everything. And so he brought one of his Dutch Shepherds in, and immediately I was like totally like, what do I got to do? I want to do this job. Like, and I had already talked to the recruiter and stuff at the Marines about pursuing a career in law enforcement. So I was like working as I already signed my contract as a military police officer in the Marine Corps. And then once I saw this at the high school and I was 17, I was like, oh man, I got to go back to my recruiter and see if they have, dog handlers, because they're already law enforcement. And so, yeah, I went there and I talked to my staff sergeant. He was like, oh yeah, like big time. They have dogs, and, you can do, one of these two options or whatever. And the one I fortunately chose worked perfect for me. But then as I graduated high school and then I joined the Marines and went to boot camp and stuff, the global war on terrorism was moving at such a fast pace that the demand for dog handlers was increasing more than like the supply was available. So they had this pipeline program essentially where you go to boot camp and then you do your advanced training and stuff like that, like AIT or infantry training battalion, ITB, and then you move on and you go to your MOS school. So for mine was military police, that was 3 months long. And then after that, they had this pipeline program where they had canine recruiters that came to the MP school, and you did a board, and essentially if they liked you, then you could just pipeline straight from MP school straight into canine school, and you wouldn't essentially go to your duty station right away. You'd go and be a dog handler first, and then you would go to your duty station. Well, as I got in and things were changing, they took the pipeline program away right as soon as I got to the fleet. And so essentially I got my orders and out of MP school, and they sent me to Okinawa, Japan, And immediately when I got there upon arrival, I was like, where's the kennel master? Like, where do I go to talk to the person with the dogs? And so I got stationed at this air station, working as an MP, and the kennel was actually on a different base, on the like further south on the island. And I ended up securing, like, a meeting, and I talked to the kennel master, and she took me in right away and was like, yeah, if you want to on job train, just come on your days off to the kennels, and we'll see if you got what it takes or whatever. And so hopping right into that, I was definitely didn't know what I was getting into. And this was like coming into July, like in Okinawa, and it's 120 degrees or something with humidity. And they were like, oh, so you want to be canine, huh? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, all right,
Yes,
well,
please.
hop in the bite suit, and you're gonna catch every single dog in the kennel, which was
You're like
like
the what
20 plus
suit?
dogs. Yeah, the what suit? Yeah, but man, I'll tell you what, I was pretty much immediately regretting that as soon as I hopped in the bite suit after catching 20 dogs. And then when I didn't pass out, they were like, oh yeah, I guess you're all right. So I stuck around for a few more weeks and did more training with them and stuff. And then finally the kennel master comes to me, and she says, she's like, yeah, there's going to be a board coming up, and you're not on the board. And I was like, what? And I was like, oh man, I came here for, like a bunch of weeks and stuff. Like, what's going on? And she goes, yeah, you're not on the board because you got a school seat. So you're going to canine school like next week. And I was like, oh, wow.
You got
So
me.
yeah, it got me pretty good. And then so I went to basic handlers course, and then, yeah, was a dog handler from then on, and, did a lot of different disciplines in the canine world, explosive detection, uh, suspect apprehension with bite work and whatnot. And then later on in my career, I switched to combat tracking and worked as a tracker my last 2 years, and then eventually worked my way up to chief tracker after kind of going to a couple different courses and changing our curriculum a little bit at 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, at the kennel there. And then, yeah, kind of going forward with that, I actually got out of the Marines and immediately started contracting right after that for the State Department. So then, yeah, I went to Iraq first, and then Afghanistan, and then I went back to Iraq on my third one. So
Yeah. Hectic,
that
man.
was a lot of information. I know I just kind of made it all flow there together, but
Nah, it's all right. I was gonna make a joke, but I remembered I've already made that joke. I think I was talking to I was talking to Mike Jones. You know Mike Jones, that decoy guy,
dude,
Primal
yeah,
Canine.
Mike Jones he was one of my trainers when I worked at AM Canine, and his dog actually was my last dog that I worked as a contractor was the dog that he trained. So yeah, I
Oh
know
fuck yeah.
Mike Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I had him on the podcast, and he did this, like, he had he because he can talk a lot, man. He's got a lot to say because he's done so much stuff. And
he
I,
really does. Yeah, he's a
yeah,
very talented guy.
and I was like, oh, tell me about your childhood, man. And he basically gave me his entire life story. And the joke I made at the end was like, oh, that's a hectic childhood. And I was like, ha ha ha. I thought it was
Yeah.
funny. But bro, there's a heap to pluck out of that one. Because you're only a couple of years younger than me. Was September 11 like something that had an impact on you joining the Marines versus going to the cops, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that was probably the one major decision that pushed me to join the military, but then specifically, yes, to join the Marines. Because initially, my stepdad, did not want me to join the Marine Corps. He made me go and talk to every single recruiter, and then he said, make an educated decision on who you want to, join, but I don't want you to join the Marines. And I was like, why don't you want me to join the Marines? And he's like, well, they're a bunch of psychos and blah, 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 and, whatever, and all that stuff. And, well, anyways, like, I chose the Marines. So, and yeah, but the one thing that was funny, and I remember this specifically in high school, was I was talking to the Navy recruiter pretty heavily because I just really I'm from a small town in Tennessee. And so I knew if I was going to join the military, I didn't want to just go to a Air Force base in the United States or an Army base, because they have a ton of bases. And I was like, no, if I'm going to join the military, I want to actually go see the world and like go abroad somewhere. And so I knew I wanted to join the Navy, possibly to hop on a ship and go a bunch of places and stuff at port and whatnot and see a bunch of countries. And so initially I was thinking that, and then the Marine recruiter one day walks up to me and he was like, "So you're thinking of joining the Navy, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to go see the world and stuff." And he's like, "Well, the Marines do that too, because we just hop on their ships and go everywhere, and they take us too." And I was like, that's very true." And he was like, "Yeah, well, 9/11 and stuff, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's like the one reason why I want to join the military." And he's like, "Well, you want to get those guys that did that, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, the Marines, well, we're gonna get them. Like, we're gonna kill them." And I was like, "All right, yeah, that's good enough for me. Like, yeah, I want to go get these guys, And he's like, "Yeah, the Navy's just gonna take us there, but the Marines are the ones that's gonna do all the work." And whatever. And my cousin was also in the Marines, and he was in Afghanistan and stuff too. And so I think that also influenced me a little bit, seeing his experience in Afghanistan, and I wanted to do that too. So last minute, I switched my decision to join the Marines instead of the Navy, and then I would never change it ever. I think that 9/11 was a big day for me. I remember it specifically, when I was in school, and my mom took me home, and I didn't know what the hell was going on, and like it was I remember even being back then, it was a very scary event for sure, not knowing what was happening, and everywhere we went, everyone was freaking out. And so, I was old enough to understand that something just wasn't right. And so, then going home and actually watching, the buildings coming down and people jumping out of the towers, to their death and stuff, I think that affected me pretty heavily. And so then after that, I was kind of pissed, and I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to join the military now. And so, and then the rest is history. So
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I'm kind of the same. I remember that specifically, but it didn't mean so much to me because we're so detached down here. Like
mhm.
if you're in mainland America and that's happening in your country, it's a bit different. But for us, it was just like we were quite removed. It was just like, oh wow, America is under attack. It's not like it was here.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Australia being one of our closest allies, for sure it would be, something happening in Sydney or something like that. Like, I would be like, wow, that's crazy to see something like that happen to, a major hub / landmark, for the country of Australia. If the tables were flipped, I would feel the same way, like a little bit detached, but with, immense concern. It would be wild.
yeah. How's the irony of that Marine recruiter who's like, yeah, no, we're going to get him. And then the Navy is the ones that end up killing Bin Laden.
Yeah, yeah, that's funny. And I've worked with a couple SEAL handlers, and yeah, it's all good stuff. I'm glad, just somebody got him. So it was gonna
Yeah.
happen eventually, but joining the Marines was there's so much different things about, because both of my younger brothers are active duty. My youngest brother is in the Air Force. His wife is in the Air Force. My younger brother was in the Navy, got out, and then rejoined the military. Now he's in the Army, and his wife was in the Navy. And then when I was in the Marine Corps, I was married also to a Marine. I'm divorced now. And yeah, so like pretty much everyone in my family has served. And so everyone chose a different like path that they wanted to go, but it was kind of neat to see that everyone kind of covered all four branches and stuff, which was pretty neat. But one thing that I do find about being a Marine is like, I didn't really know it was going to be like this when I joined, but there's just this immense like culture and like pride and history of being a Marine. And it's like when you go other places, people are like, oh, I'm an X something, X SEAL, X Ranger, like whatever. But when you meet a Marine, it's like, oh, I'm a Marine. We just keep that pride like forever, because once a Marine, always a Marine. So
Yeah, I like that, man. And that saying, is that the same as the Semper Fidelis, always faithful, or are they separate
always
sayings?
faithful.
But
Yeah, so it's along like the same line. Once a Marine, always a Marine. So I think that ideology, that saying, that mindset is to just remember, why you went to boot camp and decided to get your Eagle Globe Anchor, and then you just carry that like mentality with you the rest of your life, whether that be, the work ethic, the professionalism, the honor, courage, and commitment, all that stuff. Like you just carry that throughout your entire life and apply it to everything that you do. And most people I do know that are prior service, especially Marines, are very successful, good people, but on the other end of that scale too, I've also met some shitheads. So, but it's
bro,
bound to happen.
yeah, yeah, 100%. Like I've met some of the best and worst people I've ever known in the military, man.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's going into that though, like in the veteran community, Montana per county, we actually have the most like nonprofits in the United States, actually in the world, I'm pretty sure, specifically targeted for veteran stuff. And I've come across honestly like so many awesome people in Montana that just are, and most of their focus is about rehabilitation and stuff, and so they either do it because guys got messed up, in combat and they're trying to find their way in the world, or it's just for regular dudes that, get in the military and then they get out and they're like, man, what do I do next? And so a lot of programs that I've been involved with personally or helped people get into has been amazing. The last 3 years of my life here in Montana in the summer, I've worked wildland firefighting. So, and I got into that through a veteran program. And then in the winter times, I was ranching because I actually met some other Marine veterans who were ranching, and then they got me into it. So it's like super thankful for the community and stuff that is here in Montana, and the programs that are available. It's really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I was chatting to a mate of mine a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, and we are talking about that veteran space and then the veteran charities and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of them are quite rotten. Hey, like they're not necessarily there for you. Some of it's just a bit of a money making machine, and maybe some of
Mm-hmm.
their mechanisms and their purpose is a bit nefarious. But I know there's like personally, I'm like I donate to a couple here that I can vouch for because I know the guys that own them and run them. But I
Of
know
course, yeah.
there's a heap more, man, that people just they're not happy with. Is that the same over there? Like are they mostly good, or is there just a handful of shit
I
ones? Or
Yeah, I would actually say like yeah, most of, like I would say 99% of them are good. I've only run into one bad one, and it wasn't necessarily really even that it was bad. The person that was running it just really let it go to their head, and then it just kind of spiraled out of control. But their intention was really good from the get go. That he was actually training dogs to help veterans with PTSD, and then it slowly just kind of really I think the fame and stuff kind of just got to his head, and then unfortunately it all kind of just blew up on him or whatever, and so on and so forth. But yeah, other than that one event, I would say every other nonprofit I have ran into is top notch. Like excellent people, excellent service and what they're doing. Most of them volunteer, so they don't even get paid to do it. And then the actual program itself is fantastic. Like one I actually just got back from. I want to actually participate in it, but it there's a conflict of interest because I'll be working in the summer and I just can't take 40 days off. But that's how intense this one program is it's 40 whole days, and they essentially totally take you off the grid, no cell phone, no nothing. Even the food that you eat is food that they make there. That's all, non-GMO, like organic, like all that stuff. Cause all the
bro,
stuff that we
so
eat
good.
now is just so messed up and everything. And so they do it very like, I would say it holistic. So it's a very holistic program. They do cold plunging, they do yoga, meditation, working out. And then that's like part of the core curriculum that refocuses like the inside of their body essentially and their brain. And then they use other things on the outside to stimulate them with horses and ranching and give them like purpose and stuff too. So, and that's just only one program. I know of another one that is just taking veterans out of the military and essentially giving them a crash course internship on ranching. And then once upon graduation, they get a saddle that was donated to them and like a brand new one and a new pair of chaps and stuff. And then they kick them out and they get a ranch job right away. They start working on a ranch. So,
Shit.
but awesome stuff,
What's that first one you were talking about? That 40-day program? Who runs that?
That one is called Horses and Heroes. So you're free to tag them in this podcast if you want to. They're awesome bunch of dudes. I just got back a few weekends ago. I was up there with this guy named Brandon. He's a prior Navy SEAL. Awesome guy. He told me his whole story and program, and he now like works there training horses with them and stuff, and really enjoys what he does over there. And it's just a fantastic thing to see them promote this and help build guys back up, after they get torn down quite a bit. As you know, like the military really takes a lot away from you and stuff. And then when you get out, it's kind of like, hey, I got to put all the pieces back together and find, some direction and stuff. And so the military is not very good at helping folks out with that. But the non and in the right headspace, the right veteran communities, they're also doing a good job, like helping you after you get out and stuff.
Yeah, that's good to hear, man. I think I don't know if it's a mentality thing or if it's just a coincidence, but yeah, down here I've just heard a lot of complaints about some of the veteran organizations, and I'm like I said, I'm not really in that space. There's like probably two that I've been involved with, like really on the periphery, and I've really enjoyed that. But I've never been exposed to the bad ones, but I hear it. Um, hey, dude, I want to get back into. I want to talk about your Marine Corps history. So you were posted to. You said Okinawa or Iwo Jima first?
Okinawa. So
Yeah.
yeah, upon graduation, MP school, basic school there. They sent me to Okinawa, Japan. So I was stationed there for 2 years. So I got there in 2011, 12-ish, like December, I think, of 2011 into January 2012. And yeah, kind of did 2 years there. That was a lot of fun. Like I said, I went immediately to the kennel master and I was like, yeah, where can I be a dog handler? Like, how do I do this? Like, I'm willing to work my days off, like whatever. And at that time I was working night shift too. So I was getting off a night shift, going and working on job training at the kennels, catching dogs and spraying dog shit, and doing all the stuff no one else wants to do, but they're really kind of, putting the fire to you to see what you're made of. And if you really want a canine that bad. And which I have a funny story after this. And then yeah, so then I got a school seat and then went to basic handlers course and then I was just a dual purpose dog handler for my whole time in Okinawa. So I did explosive detection and bite work. And then also as I kind of grew up in the Marine Corps and I, I was a Lance Corporal and then kind of was moving up a little bit in the chain, not necessarily to Corporal yet, but making my way up as a Lance Corporal and getting other billets and stuff. So I was also the training NCO. So I had to schedule all the training for the dog stuff, like, 2 weeks out in advance. So I had to just call all these different venues and ask if it was okay if we could train there and make sure that no one was there that day and whatever. And then I was also an explosive driver and armed guard. So like I would also, if I wasn't actually doing training that day, I would get to work about 2 hours early. And then we would have to take the bomb truck to the munitions area, grab the explosives for the day, and then bring it to the training location. And then we would, post a guard while the trainers would grab all the explosive aids and go out and plan everything. And then, the dogs would go find them. And then I would drive them back at the end of the day. So.
And this is all on Okinawa, right?
It is. Yeah. All on Okinawa. And so we did all of that. And that just included like my canine duties for just everyday stuff. But the main, like when I was actually doing my job, those were just training days as I was mentioning. But like when you're actually going to work, I would drive around a patrol car and post at a gate and search vehicles as they came in, doing random anti-terrorism measures. So I'm just like selecting random vehicles and searching them. Or maybe not
Just the hot
selecting
chicks,
them at
yeah.
random. Maybe, yeah, just the hot chicks, exactly.
Some fat dude who,
or
like, he's definitely not a terrorist. Go on, you can get him, mate.
yeah, or
She's a
like
terrorist.
or like the base colonel shows up and I'm like giving him a hard time just because I can,
Yeah.
or the sergeant major or something like that. But yeah, wild times, dude. Like canine being there was pretty cool. So and so yeah, I would just like do that on my work days, doing random anti-terrorism measures and walking around patrolling stuff. And then of course, like we would get, called. So, if there's a domestic disturbance or a fight or something like that, they need backup, like, we'll bring the dog. And then at that point, the dog is pretty much, crowd control. So when, especially when you get up to like Camp Schwab, like where all the infantry guys are and all the recon guys, like, man, they get Camp Schwab and Camp Hansen, like those two places where all the infantry is, like they get into full on barracks brawls. And then we got to come up there and like break it up and stuff. And yeah, sometimes like just doing it the old school way doesn't work and you got to bring a dog out. And then immediately everyone's like, oh, okay, I'm done fighting now. I don't want to get bit by the dog,
Yeah.
And so the crazy thing was too is like my whole career I never had to send my dog on anybody because as soon as I would show up, everyone's like, oh no, I don't want any part of that. I don't want to get my ass bit or whatever. And I also had an all black Belgian Malinois with black eyes. So like everyone saw this dog and just thought it was the devil reincarnated. Like he was a mean motherfucker, dude. His name was Tommy. And yeah, he was like a 12-year-old, like Belgian Malinois, like still whooping it. The dog had like 8 deployments. Like, yeah, we all called him like the master guns of the kennel because he was so old and like had the most experience out of every dog. And so when I was a green handler, they paired me with a really experienced dog. And that helped a lot, in early development in my canine career for sure. That dog just like all animals like that are experienced, if you're green, like that animal will teach you everything you need to know. Like this is just talking about dogs, but I've had the exact same experience with an older horse or a mule or whatever. It's just these animals are incredibly intelligent, and they gain all this experience and knowledge, and eventually they're telling you what to do. You just don't understand it yet because, as a dog handler, you understand there's just that unspoken language that is how we communicate between animals and humans, and they just do an excellent job like conveying that to you when you're young and you're trying to progress in your career and stuff. So getting paired with an older dog is just awesome.
Yeah. Do you have a photo of Tommy somewhere?
I do. Yeah. He's actually up there on that wall. So he's Tommy and then Foxtrot 374. That's his tattoo number. But yeah, I could probably just like grab it really quick. Hold on.
Here we go.
Yep. That's the
Oh,
old man right there.
Yeah. Damn.
I don't have all of the dogs that I've worked up on my wall there. Those are just like kind of the top 3 that really helped shape my career essentially. So Tommy was that first one that I worked that had a lot of knowledge, and then Nikki, this dog right here. Whenever the podcast is done, I'll send you a bunch of photos and stuff like that from
Yeah,
my
for
career.
sure,
You can just
man.
use those for the posting and whatever. But yeah, Nikki, this dog right over here, she was my combat tracking dog, only female dog I ever worked too. Fantastic dog. I love that dog. She unfortunately passed away in 2017. She had a brain tumor and she had a
Ooh,
stroke and died. So
poor
yeah,
thing.
she had a heat stroke a few times. And so I think that neurological issue finally caught up with her. But yeah, fantastic dog. She only had 3 handlers. A guy that was my superior had her, deployed to Afghanistan with her and utilized her in combat tracking operations, actually in Afghanistan, tracking down terrorists and stuff like that, and piecing
Nice.
together terrorist cell networks. Essentially, I'll get into that a little bit later, like describing combat tracking and essentially how the fundamentals of it applies to the global war on terrorism and so on and so forth. But yeah, she was an awesome dog, and then he had her first, and then I got her, and then after that, I was getting out, and I was kind of transitioning from that senior person to the actual trainer. And so when I was the chief tracker there, and the trainer for the trackers, I actually passed my dog off to one of my boots, and then I just like all hands off leash, and I just was just there training, and I didn't work a dog anymore. So yeah, so that was really awesome. And then Ozzy, my last dog. Hey, since you're Australian,
Tommy and
Anyways,
Aussie, I love it.
yeah, and so Ozzy was my last dog that I worked on my 3rd deployment to Iraq, and I actually got to adopt him. So he doesn't live with me here in Montana. He lives with my mom in Tennessee, mostly just because of my job. I just can't have a dog all the time. So, and now he's
Yeah,
older, so he's just there retiring and stuff like that. But yeah, I actually adopted him out when I got done with my canine career, essentially. So
man, that's so cool. I always love to hear that the dogs get to retire with a handler or at least a canine person. I had a
mm-hmm.
shit experience when it came to that, so it's always nice to hear that when
Right,
a dog
yeah,
does go to a handler, man.
it was it was a very rare kind of thing to happen. So the company I was working for, they lost the contract essentially, and so the only other contract that they had that was CONUS was the TSA contract, and that required like Labradors and like bird dogs kind of dogs in the airports. So not biting people and, whatever, like aggressive dogs. They always called them like pointy ear dogs. That contract was specific, like no German Shepherds, no Belgian Malinois, no Dutch Shepherds, etc. And so they were like, well, we don't have any more contracts that these dogs can go on. So if you have one of these dogs, like you guys are adopting it. And so either that or they were going to sell them, to, police department or whatever. And
Yeah.
so at the time, Ozzy was 5. So I got to adopt my perfectly like bred, trained German Shepherd from Holland. That it was a phenomenal specimen of a dog at 5 years old. I don't know a single handler that has adopted a dog that young. Most of the time they're 10 plus years old. And
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, so
100%.
he's lived a good, healthy life, in Tennessee. And yeah, he's loving it. So
That's sick, man. And dude, I just got a couple of questions about Okinawa, and Okinawa fascinates me because, um, obviously but if the listeners don't know, there's a massive Marine Corps and Army battle there, Second World War, like
yeah,
huge one, huge, huge. It was like I think it was one of the last, if not the last, battles of the Second World War. Like it was fucking huge.
it
Um,
was. Yeah. Okinawa, there is, when you go there to the island, like if you're really fascinated with World War II history, uh, Okinawa is a very special place to go and be stationed because a lot of the war remnants are still there. So like you can like I mean I remember lots of times I would be out in the jungle like training with my dog and you come across like a pillbox or a bunker that used to have Japanese soldiers in it with a machine gun and you can look in there and there are still like sometimes boxes of like ammo and stuff like still stacked in there with kanji written on it and everything. Like I mean most of it's all kind of deteriorated and stuff now, but some of that stuff is still very present there, after it also being a modern country now and has like a city, on top of it. But a lot of the island is still jungle. And so in the jungle, all that stuff just got lost and everything. But it's a really fascinating place. And yeah, to further your point, yeah, it was one of the most brutal battles in World War II against the Japanese Imperial Army and, the forces of the United States and the Pacific Theater. And it was just really cool and honestly really humbling, especially as a Marine, to go and see all of that and see what Marines before me what they did to fight for our country and stuff and now like Japan is one of our strongest allies, so it's just also really cool to see it from a historical aspect and now in a modern aspect, like the Japanese army now, because they're no longer a defense force, does massive joint training operations. I did a little bit of it when I was there in Japan and I got to be with some infantry guys that did it there, but it was just really cool. And then when I was stationed at Camp Pendleton after that, the Japanese self-defense ground force would come there and do some training and stuff. And I remember there would be some Japanese guys there in the PX, and I would just be like, "Oh, hayo gozaimasu," and then they're like, "Oh, hayo," because they realized that I had been stationed in Japan, and that's why I knew Japanese, and so it was really funny, and they loved that. It was great,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, huge historical place for sure, Okinawa.
yeah. And there's places like that I'd love to visit. I'd love to go to Iwo Jima, some other places in the Pacific where there were some massive Australian battles like Kokoda and stuff. And
Absolutely.
I read that book, With the Old Breed by Eugene
Mm-hmm.
Sledge.
Eugene
Man,
Sledge, yeah,
obviously that's what the Pacific series was based on, that book and the
yes,
book. But man, oh bro, that was so intense, that book. It was one
yeah,
of the best war books I've ever read. And I've read some really
absolutely.
good ones.
Yeah. So Robert Leckie also, wrote Helmet for
Lucky.
My Pillow and all those other guys. Like seeing the TV show is one thing, and they did such a really great job like depicting it. It's fantastic. I've probably watched The Pacific like over 20 times. Like it's such an awesome thing to watch. But yeah, the books whole nother level as far as like you want to talk about raw, gritty, real gruesome details. Like they're in the books, for sure. The TV show is just so it's visual, it's very fast paced, but you don't get to see it. When you read something, it really just kind of burns something inside of you, and the books do really good job depicting their time in the Pacific Theater.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, man. I would actually be keen to read that book again. It was an audio book. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that's right. I listened to it on YouTube. I had to like leave the phone open and everything, and if the screen locked, I had to like open it again because I'm not fucking paying
Yeah.
for YouTube just to get rid of
No,
some ads.
yeah. And now it's just difficult. YouTube is difficult. So now there's a
Yeah.
bunch of ads and whatever. But
Oh mate, I'm like listening to like Eugene Sledge talk about landing on Peleliu, then it's like, hey, have you heard about this new chewing gum? And I'm like, you
yeah, you're like, wow, it's really
motherfuckers.
cramping my style trying to hear about this story, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, another really cool part about Okinawa is I went to a lot of the major battle sites while I was there. And going up on the north end of the island, so you have Naga and Nago. And so Naga is the south end of the island. So imagine just drawing a line north and south, kind of like how North and South Korea is. Like just take Okinawa and draw the bottom half is Naga, top half is Nago. And going up to Nago, it's very jungly. So like imagine like Hawaii or something like that, and you're outside of Honolulu and you're in the jungle. Like that's mostly what Nago is like. So the Jungle Warfare Training Center is up there at Camp Gonzales and Camp Schwab, Camp Hansen, where all the Marines for the infantry guys are up there. That's where all like the major ranges are, like for artillery and mortars and helicopter ranges and stuff like that. And so I went up there one time to do I think we were doing joint training with the Force Reconnaissance Marines, and so they were actually out there in the bay with their Zodiacs, like the rib boats and stuff. And so we got to ride on the Zodiacs with our dogs and practice going from a ship and doing a beach assault with the Zodiac. But it was not really a beach assault; it was a reconnaissance mission. So of course, all that would be under the cover of darkness and stuff. But it was really cool to kind of not only just be there present day, like doing training on the island of Okinawa, but you could almost in a way imagine what it must have been like for those guys assaulting the beach, in their track vehicles back then in World War II. And it I don't know, something inside of you really just, it feels just nostalgic, but also very scary. It was just a really surreal feeling to be there on the island and be part of the history, of it. So
Yeah. Yeah, because I've heard a few people talk about being posted to Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and I've just never had the opportunity to be like, man, that surely like maybe some people listening don't understand the significance, maybe, but I think I do. Yeah, it always fascinated me because I'm like we don't have any military bases in Libya where the siege of Tobruk was, or in Kokoda or anything like that. So the fact that you guys still, occupy that part of Japan is fascinating to me on a few different levels. So yeah, no, thanks,
right.
man, for explaining that, dude. That puts a lot of stuff into context in terms of the way I was thinking about it.
Yeah, and the modern application, the main reason that we are there today is, the threat from North Korea and China. So like being the main proponent of defense in Japan, not only in Okinawa but in mainland Japan as well, with the fleet that we have and the Navy being stationed, and of course like going all around the Pacific to keep everything in check. Okinawa is a strategic point more so because of North Korea. So while I was stationed there, multiple times North Korea would launch missiles over Okinawa and they would crash into the sea. And so you would know it because like, all the alarms and stuff would go off and they're essentially launching like, their ballistic missiles over top of us and stuff, which was terrifying. But Okinawa's main job there as a place is to deter, that kind of aggression from North Korea, whether that would be an assault like from the sea or from the air. So of course now we have self-defense systems and whatever. So you can imagine how Okinawa could apply to deterring ballistic missiles coming across the Pacific towards the United States or any other country for that matter. So that's the main reason why Okinawa is such a strategic point in the Pacific, not just mainland Japan. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's I'm sure you probably heard it before. People that don't know, obviously, they're like, war these days, just press a button. You're like, yeah, pretty sure, like you seen what's going on in Gaza or Ukraine or
Of
the
course.
Middle
Yeah.
East? Like it's not like that, man. Like if it really came down to it, they'd be storming the beach on fucking Okinawa, and they'd be
Yeah.
taking
And
Iwo Jima again for the airfield.
Okinawa and Hawaii, as Marine Corps bases, as the global war on terrorism drew down, and now as it is officially over, essentially the Marine Corps, when we were a major land-based force in the Middle East, like we had tank battalions and we had, a bunch of other assets that we no longer need because now we have shifted our focus more so now, not really in like anti-terrorism anymore. Like now we're facing Russia and China, North Korea, and all of these places. You're asking for almost just like a round two of the Pacific theater. And so the Marine Corps bases in Hawaii and Okinawa now are now becoming major hubs of training for jungle warfare and all that other stuff, where we're expected to probably fight in the next upcoming major war, whether that would be against China or Russia or whoever it may be. That's kind of now the new thing is like they like to say we've gone back to our maritime roots. So traditionally the Marines, Continental Marines and everybody else was a force stationed upon a ship, and they were essentially the infantry of the ship. And so we have gone back now to that traditional mindset of, the Navy takes us to where we need to go, and we take a helicopter or a boat and we land on an island, occupy the island, and take it over. And so it's essentially just World War II all over again. But we're retraining for that, getting out of leaving the global war on terrorism behind and land-based units, and now going back to maritime units, which is primarily everything's done via a boat or a helicopter, or a submarine or something like that to get us where we need to go. So it's changed drastically, for sure, in the modern battlefield that we're looking at. But the Okinawa and Hawaii both just are intense places. I don't know if you've been in the jungle before. It fucking sucks. It's not fun at all. It's hot, humid, muggy. You have no sense of direction. A compass really only gets you so far in a map because you have no terrain features to navigate off of. So it's essentially you kind of need a GPS. You can do it with a compass and all that other stuff, but it's just immensely difficult. And then on top of that, in Okinawa, they have, I think it's like 17 poisonous snakes or something like that, and they're all pit vipers. So it's like, yeah, you go there and you don't know if you're stepping on a freaking snake or if it's gonna bite you in the face or whatever. And then the spiders are like this big, and I for the people listening, I'm talking like they're like 2 or 3 feet across. I've seen one with my own eyes that ate a bird. It's insane. Like they're ginormous, and their webs span like the size of a room or like half of a house. And I know that sounds unrealistic, but I swear to God, I've seen it with my own eyes, and it's absolutely terrifying. So the jungle is not a fun place.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's gross, man. I've sorry, when I say I've never like done a training exercise in the jungle, but I've been in
Mm-hmm.
jungles before, and I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't want to have done this in the military, man.
Yeah, and doing it with dogs, like especially tracking, you you can get lost so easy. Like because you know how fast paced the dog is, like picking up the scent on the scent line and the track line, and in a matter of 25 to 30 seconds, you're going from your start point to maybe 25 to 50 feet away, and you're lost. You don't even remember where the start point is because everything looks the same. And that is a scary concept, and kind of going into jungle warfare and combat tracking is, since we're, this is a canine podcast and we're talking about dogs, like the whole origin of combat tracking came from, post like World War II, but before Vietnam era, when I think it was actually the British military at the end of World War II was starting to use tracking dogs, but they weren't really using them like the way that we were using them in Vietnam. And essentially, the Viet Cong were so good at jungle warfare against conventional military that we were exhausting all options to try to fight them. And so eventually, the military came up with these combat tracking units, these anti-tracking units, and we would take dogs with like a Mac V like SOG team to find out where they were at, counter track them, and then essentially ambush them because it was, the shoe was on the other foot at that point. They were just so good at ambushing us, and then they would get in their little tunnels and go away. We had no idea. And they were so good at that we just couldn't figure out what to do. So someone was like, dude, let's just bring some dogs in and track these fuckers. And then it actually became insanely successful. And so we were using dogs essentially to track the Viet Cong back to their training camps and their headquarters and stuff like that, or their tunnels. And we were just gathering information and intelligence on the enemy, and then using all that information against them. And then we would set up the ambushes and ambush them. And then the tables kind of turned a lot, but obviously, Vietnam didn't really turn out how everyone wanted it to. But the fact was that some of the origins of utilizing the dogs there really came in handy for a lot of guys that probably would have never made it home unless it was for a dog. So it's just a crazy origin story for that. And then applying that then it kind of just like went on the shelf after that. Like they took the combat tracking program, utilized it for Vietnam, and then every other war after that, they didn't really need it. And then here comes, the Gulf War and the global war on terrorism, where now we're dealing with, major explosive, improvised explosive device problems. And, the Valen will only get you so far, and minesweepers will only get you so far, and up armored vehicles will only get you so far. But we're talking like millions and millions of dollars worth of equipment being destroyed every 10 feet because Afghanistan is essentially one giant minefield from, when they fought the Russians. And so then we were like, okay, well, how do we utilize dogs in this theater? And so now they're utilizing explosive detection canines to find IEDs and EODs coming and blowing them up. But where the combat tracker comes in to that whole picture is, it's a joint operation. So you're using your explosive detection canine to locate an IED. And then as the tracker, I am documenting that location where it was. And then before anyone contaminates it, the dog handler will stop, put a marker down, EOD comes out and blows it up, but no one moves anywhere. Like you don't want any other movement. Number one, because you don't want to trip a secondary. And number two, when the tracker shows up, you don't want to contaminate the area with your spore, your scent. And so after the detonation of the IED, there will be a large cordon set up, and I'll essentially do a circle around the cordon, and I'll try to find a set of tracks. And that's where the IED emplacer came in, put the IED in, and then they left. And essentially, if you can track that, you can utilize this technique called the Bitterman technique. And over a course of time, you have different locations of IEDs on where they're emplaced. And then you also have a correlating set of tracks on where the emplacer was coming from. And essentially, if you put it on a giant map, you just do a back azimuth from all of the locations where the IEDs were found and where the tracks are leading to, put that on a giant map, find a village that has all the lines intersecting. And so that you can pretty much determine out of all the villages that are there, your IED emplacer is coming from this specific location. And then, of course, you just get a team together, go out, do some investigating, and being like, all right, round up all the military age males, and I have all the information that I need to get this person, arrested. Like I know their shoe size, I know how they walk, I know their gait, I know if they have a tick or a habit, do they smoke, if they're right-handed or left-handed, like all of this stuff. And so then I'm using all this information, and you go to the village and you find these military age males, and then you get the guy. And then also the dog has the scent. So then I can just take all their shoes and line them up, and the dog will tell me which one the person is just based off of their scent from their shoe. So it's that is the modern application of utilizing a combat tracking team in say, like, anti-terrorist kind of warfare, guerrilla warfare, like that kind of the whole entire global war on terrorism. And that was our specific job as combat tracker, was to do that exact thing. So, yeah. And of course, and that's on the small end of the scale, right? That's like the tip of the spear kind of thing. On the large end of it now, like just finding that one person is great, because now you're eliminating an emplacer, but now you're interrogating this person, and now you're finding out who he's just the little fish. Now you're looking for the big fish. You got the emplacer. Now I want to own the terror cell network. Now I want to find out where the bomb maker is. Where are they getting their money from? Are they growing, hashish or opium or poppies, and like how are they funding this? And so essentially just this one tiny piece of information by a footprint is essentially unlocking all of these different parts of the terrorist cell network. And then that is how, you defeat, terrorism and stuff, is essentially like breaking all that down and eliminating their resources, taking away their emplacers, taking away their opium in their pot fields, burning it so they don't have a source of income. Then eventually you're finding the bomb makers. And so it's just chipping away at all this. And eventually that's kind of how you gain ground in Afghanistan, is taking away all of these things. And so on the scale of utilizing canines, you're using them for explosive detection and bite work apprehension. And as you know too, and like working with some guys, with direct action elements, Ranger battalions or SASR guys, and you're getting information, like you say, hey, this is where this emplacer is. We're going to go in, at night and infiltrate the compound and get them. It's either kill or capture or whatever. And you also have your dog that's doing the explosive detection on the mission, but it's also your cordon dog too. So when you have someone run away, the dog goes after that person too, which more than likely that's probably your guy anyways. But it's crazy to see the application of canines in just like war is terrible, but like war gives everybody so much technology and information, and the whole global war on terrorism advanced the use of canines to just this crazy degree that we're seeing nowadays. And also medical application too. How many people have been blown up, legs amputated, all sorts of stuff like in the global war on terrorism. And now that's why we have all these modern practices, like the application of a tourniquet has changed so much from the initial part of the global war on terrorism. And now we're learning like, oh yeah, you can keep a tourniquet on for this long and it's not going to, they're not going to lose their leg or whatever. But it's on a large scale, it's just really crazy to see all that.
Yeah. And that's a couple of interesting points you raised there. There's that strategic private, or the lowest level strategic operator. Things you do on the battlefield can have a huge strategic effect. And the second is that like that innovation that is driven by necessity, right? So it's not like things don't happen in a vacuum. So you've got to go out and real world test it, and sometimes you need to fucking like a war. I mean, look at Ukraine and Gaza, all the stuff that they're doing with drones and counter drones and
absolutely,
some of these like shoulder-fired weapons against these huge armored vehicles. Like this stuff you don't find out until you pressure test it. So
no, yeah, and even then, like
as war
EMP
is,
technology and stuff too. Like we're now seeing conventional drones like DJI drones, and then we're strapping grenades and C4 to them. And they're like, okay, well, how do we do this? And it was kind of like the old World War II method, like, oh, let's just shoot out this drone with a machine gun and hopefully one of the bullets hits it. Well, now we have, EMP technology. And so they're shooting these, like, you can't see it because it's an EMP, but it's a direct energy weapon shooting it at the drone, and the drone just falls out of the sky. And like, it is just the wildest thing. We're seeing this in real time right now. And also on that point, you remember how like when the global war on terrorism was happening, like we had to watch all this shit from people's like little video cameras and GoPros, and then it got uploaded on Live Leak, and we're literally, because of social media and cell phones, like I can watch the war in Ukraine right here from my cell phone of a dude that has Instagram just filming it. And it's the widest source of visual information that we're seeing. Like it's almost just so much that you can't process it. It's like so crazy.
Yeah.
And then I think about that too, like how would you utilize a dog in like the war in Ukraine against Russia? Like, it would have its applications, but with so much stuff with drones, like I would be terrified to even just walk outside because I would just get a mortar dropped on me from a fucking drone. And how do you fight that with a dog? You don't, it's just really crazy.
I wonder if you could utilize the hearing for something like that. Like if the drone rotors at a certain altitude, like we probably couldn't hear it on the spectrum that we can hear. Maybe a dog could, because I've kind of thought the same thing. I'm like, how do you evolve? Like if combat evolves so fast and wars are so different, and we've just fought this 20-year unconventional war where dogs were great, and now we're seeing a lot of these huge conventional land battles, peer on peer force sort of stuff. I'm like, where does where does one dog fit into this equation? I mean, there's always that special operations element, you know, going after some logistics guys or, you know, whatever. But
Yes,
it's
of
like
course.
we're talking two armies together, so you don't need to be like, oh, it's one footprint, like you've been blown up by a tank. So it's just
Right. Yeah,
you'd
but
have. I wonder how you'd use it.
utilizing it. Yeah, I mean, to think about it, I guess it wouldn't really be that hard to train a dog to be a sentry dog specifically to look for drones and listen for drones. And then, you just cue in the response. And that's your early warning detection system, much like actually how they utilize sentry dogs in the Pacific theater against the Japanese. So you have, your listening post observation post way out ahead of the element, the military element, whether that's a battalion or a company or whatever. You have this LPOP way out ahead with the sentry dog. And, these guys are at night, you can't see through the jungle, even in the daytime. So let alone, how are you going to see an enemy force advancing against you at night? Well, the sentry dog was alerting, that, hey, an enemy force is coming, and they're, doing that, whether they're whining or I don't know what exact cue they were, training their dogs to do when that would happen. But yeah, you could still apply, I think, a sentry dog, to the modern warfare, with drones and stuff like that. But instead of, looking out and down, they're now looking up, which is, something I feel like that they can do. It's no different than bird dogs, honestly. Like bird dogs here in the United States, like utilizing upland bird dogs and duck hunting dogs. I waterfowl hunt all the time. So I usually have a Labrador sitting right next to me, and I'm looking up, looking for ducks, and I look over and the dog's doing the same thing, like, oh, where are the ducks at, So I guess in that respect, it really wouldn't be that hard, and a duck is almost the same size as a drone. So, wouldn't be that difficult, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm sure you like strap a little camera to the dog's back, controlled, and they're like, "Oh, where's the dog looking up there?" You zoom in and you shoot the beam, and I don't know, fuck.
Yeah, scary application. I prefer to be a little. It's probably why I don't do dog handling anymore. But
yeah, man, I got no interest in dying by some fucking artillery attack by a drone or something.
Nope, I've watched too many videos of that happening already. I'm good. So
yeah, I've purposely avoided that stuff, mate. I'm just like, it's not my space anymore, bro. Hey, dude, I want to round out your Marine Corps career, and I want to get into some of your State Department stuff, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's press on. So
because you said you did a bunch of workups in the Marines in terms of like going on some deployments, but you didn't deploy with the Marine Corps, did you? In
no,
terms of like Afghanistan, Iraq.
Right. Yeah. No, I had some deployments slated. So my first 2 years when I worked in the Marines, I obviously worked in Okinawa, and that was a garrison unit. So we have two sides of the house for canine and working as an MP. You have garrison, and then you have field. And so garrison is pretty much what you imagine regular law enforcement officers do. You drive around in a patrol car, searching stuff or whatever, contraband kind of deal, or using them to bite suspects. So, and that is the garrison side, which I did in Okinawa. When I was at Camp Pendleton in California, I worked as a field MP, which is a different set of skills that you get to utilize and apply. And essentially, that's all of your explosive detection, combat tracking, actual utilization of your dog in a combat environment. And so it's a lot of patrolling, a lot of sentry work, and going on helicopters and ships and LAVs and Humvees, and like everything that you're expected to do when you're deployed in Afghanistan, you're pretty much working up training and doing in a field unit. And so while I was there, I had two different slated deployments. One I was actually on, but like we just hung out at Camp Pendleton because we had 4 handlers total, and the ship could only accommodate 2 handlers and 2 dogs. And it was also the first time they ever put dogs on a ship to see if it would work. And needless to say, the captain of the ship didn't like the dogs shitting everywhere, so they kicked us off the ship. And they just put them on a helicopter and said, yeah, you know what? You guys just go to wherever they went, Djibouti or whatever the hell they went. And they just forward staged there because they were actually operating in Iraq and Syria against ISIS at that point. And so guys were going out there and forward deploying with the unit I was attached to was the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit. And so the MU, as it's called, we have 2 different sides because we have 3 major bases in the United States. four Marine Corps units. We have 1 MEF, 2 MEF, and 3 MEF. And 1 MEF is stationed at Camp Pendleton. 2 MEF is stationed at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. And then 3rd MEF is actually stationed in Okinawa, which is the Pacific Theater, or Pacific element, I should say. Anyways, so each one has their own specific MEUs attached to that. And essentially, like, a MEU is a Marine unit attached to a ship that goes to a deployment at sea and does their little tour, and then they come back. So it's like a 6-month, 8-month tour at sea. You go to different ports, you do joint training with different militaries. Oftentimes, if you're on the 11th MEU, the 15th MEU, or something of that nature, you actually end up going to Australia, and you cross train with the Australian forces down there too. So, but yeah, I did a workup with the 11th MEU, and didn't get to deploy with them, but all of my other counterparts went ahead and deployed with the MEU. And then after I got disattached from the MEU and back to my parent unit, I was doing a workup on what's called a special purpose MAGTAF. The MAGTAF is Marine Air Task Ground Force. And so it's a MAGTAF is almost like a special deployment. It's a conglomerate of forces getting thrown together, but it's not necessarily like falling underneath a major unit like 1MEF or something like that. It's like a subunit and a subunit all combined together. That's different. I don't really know how to explain it. It's just a throw together deployment almost. But anyways, we were doing a workup deployment that was going to the workup itself was imitating rotating a force in 3 different countries from 3 different cities. And we would essentially have 3 dog handlers, and each one would deploy to a different country in the Middle East. And then we would rotate them out with 3 different forces that they were attached to. So one was a Green Beret unit, one was a Navy SEAL unit, and then I think the other one was a foreign SF unit. I want to say, I think it was the Dutch Commandos or something like that. They were rotating those 3 guys out, 3 different bases, 3 different units, and they would do 2 months at one base, and then they would rotate and go to the next one, and then they would get a new dog handler. So essentially on their deployment, they got to work with 3 different forces in 3 different countries, all doing, cool. Yeah, it was a great concept, and it worked really good. Every single guy cause I didn't actually go because I chose not to re-enlist. So this fell right at the end of my career in 2015 in October. And they were like, hey, well, if you want to go on this deployment, you're going to have to re-enlist, or you're going to have to extend. And I essentially just said, no, I don't think this is worth it. I'm just going to get out. And because at that time, the retention recruiter, as it was called, they were really notorious for giving false pretenses on your re-enlistment package. So they were saying, oh, you're going to extend for 6 months and do this deployment, and then come to find out you get your package back and you've extended for 2 years, and now you're in the Marine Corps another 2 years or something like that. It was some fucked up shit. Anyway, it was shady. I didn't like any part of it. And I was like, you know what? 5 years is enough. I think I'm ready to get out. And so I chose to not go on that deployment, and I chose a successor to take my place. And then the funny thing that happened was that every single guy I trained up for that workup to go, every single one of them saw combat when they went there, all fighting ISIS. So doing some pretty badass shit, I got to say. I'm really proud of every single one of those guys that worked up on that deployment and actually went and did some stuff. Of course, it was all off the books. So, none of them got combat action ribbons for it or got, formal recognition, but all the stuff that I saw from the pictures and the stories, like, was some real shit that they actually got to go fucking do. And it's unfortunate that that's sometimes what happens when you work with clandestine units, but it's not about coming back with a chest full of medals. It's about what's all up in here in your head, the experience that you get, and the pride you get from it, and the people you work with. And that's all that matters, if you ask me. It's just the experience.
Yeah. And that ISIS campaign was a strange one for a lot of countries, including us, because we just wrapped up the global war on terror, 20-year long conflict. A lot of people died. Public was fucking probably sick of war, and this new thing came along that was particularly heinous. And Absolutely. It was like the government and the public just had no appetite for more war. So, like you said, They're doing these little clandestine covert missions when they're not really, there wasn't a lot of like helmet camera footage coming back of like big battles and that type of stuff.
No.
It was like, I'm sure it was exactly the same as Iraq and Afghanistan, but it just wasn't. It wasn't in the collective consciousness and the political appetite to have it out there.
Right. Well, I would say the major differences, in the fight against ISIS compared to, let's just say, against the Taliban in Afghanistan, is that, in Iraq and Syria and Jordan and all these other countries, they have a pretty well established military with special forces units. Like, I'm not discrediting the Afghan commandos or anything like that.
I
It,
am.
it was everyone was using it, but we're talking about like a pretty well equipped force, a better country, more money, better military industrial complex, et cetera. And like, so these guys are being attached to Iraqi special forces units and, counterterrorism units and stuff like that have been doing this for quite a while. And on top of that, you're also getting embedded with, other countries' special forces units that are in NATO that are, really well equipped and well trained for years and years and years. So they're coming over as advisors, but really we're doing direct action with these guys, like shoulder to shoulder, going in the doorways and doing that kind of stuff. And so it was a different war fighting ISIS. And like, I remember specifically on my first deployment when I worked, so when I was working for the State Department, I worked for the US ambassador directly on his protection detail team. And so, I would remember sitting in our mission briefings and getting the intel that we're getting directly from other countries as well. And they're saying like, hey, don't go to this market tomorrow because there's going to be a V bid and it's going to blow up. And I remember I didn't go on mission that day because they canceled it. And that night I was sitting outside my room and I was smoking a cigarette and I hear this loud explosion. Mind you, also, I'm in the green zone on the north side of the Tigris River, and the red zone is on like the southeast side of the Tigris. I can hear this explosion from miles away, and it didn't shake anything, but I sure as shit heard it. And I check in the next morning to do another mission briefing, and they're like, I was like, did you guys hear that explosion last night? And they were like, yeah, like check out the news, and they like showed me the report. And like that IED was a V-bid that came down from Mosul that ISIS had sent and embedded it in Baghdad, blew up a bazaar, killed like 25 people, like insane thing. It was crazy. And that was the threat that we were really getting in Baghdad at the time in 2016 was, ISIS setting down V-bids. And mind you also that ISIS's territory that they are now controlling is predominantly all of northern Syria, northern Iraq, Ramadi, Fallujah, all that stuff. And now they're closing in on Baghdad, which is where I'm working at. And the threat is real. Like every day it's you just don't know what you're going to run into. And the mission briefings only give you so much. But honestly, what is really scary is dog handling, like working an explosive detection canine in a city, because every window has the potential to hold a sniper in it. Every garbage can, every dumpster, every sewage grate has, every car, there could be an IED anywhere and you don't know what to even think or do or look. I think you just kind of embrace what it is and you go out and you just search. I would say it's more nerve-wracking than being in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, you have all this open terrain, and granted, like the IED's on the ground somewhere, but at least it's just under your feet somewhere in front of you. Now, if you're in a village, that's a different story. It could be in the wall. It could be, under a tiny little footbridge. It could be in a tree that you're not really paying attention to. Like one of the most valuable pieces of information I got as a dog handler was to be 3-dimensional. And that means you're looking below you, around you, and above you, like all 3 dimensions. And because I saw so many reports, and unfortunately I knew some guys that got killed there because they weren't looking up and the tripwire's at the top of the door or it's in a tree. And like, you're never really looking at that. You're looking at the bottom, you're watching your dogs change of behavior, all this other stuff, and you're not really paying attention and you get tripped on all these other stuff. So it just is crazy, in the city, it's kind of nerve wracking, and you're in an up armored vehicle and stuff, but some of these IEDs, that's not gonna stop it. You're going to be dead. But
Yeah.
just wild times for sure being there when that happened. And then when I went to Kabul, same kind of deal. Taliban are always starting trouble, blowing stuff up, or whatever. And that was also the time when ISIS's Afghan like or ISIS's cell was getting
Oh, ISIS
established in
K.
Afghanistan. ISIS K, yeah. So ISIS K was getting established in Afghanistan, and the Taliban were fucking pissed because they're like, no, this is our turf, you know. And so now, not only do you have the Taliban still trying to attack us, now you're trying to have ISIS K also attack us too to bolster their reputation in the region, and being like, so as you know, like when someone does something there, they immediately claim credit for it. And so ISIS K is like blowing up mosques and doing all this other stuff and just killing all these innocent people. And the Taliban's like, that wasn't us. And ISIS K was like, yeah, it was us. And so it was a crazy fucking time there. Cause like in Afghanistan too, like, I mean, I'd go to the gym and at nighttime, you know, and I would go to the gym and I would come back and a mortar lands right next to my room, or like an RPG lands like right next to, you know, where I go to work every single day or something like that. And like, fortunately for me, I was always in the right place at the right time. And, you know, I very easily could have, you know, been injured or something like that. And a few of my friends that were also there at the same time I was, they did get blown up. They got blown up by like a really massive V bid that actually took out the German embassy. This was right before I got in country. And two of my friends both got concussions. Fortunately, they didn't, you know, lose a limb or have anything major happen to them. They both just got severely concussed. One guy actually was sitting on the shitter and it blew up and he went into the ceiling, he said. So that was kind of funny actually hearing about his experience. But yeah, just crazy times. And then of course, when I went on my third deployment back to Baghdad, after my divorce, that was when President Trump had killed that Iranian Quds Force general, Al Soleimani or whatever his name was. And
Yeah.
the Iranians were fucking pissed after that. And so I would say probably the most high threat you need to focus on in Baghdad is the Iranian backed militias. And so those elements that are there are always doing shit behind the scenes, and they're always mortaring, they're always rocketing, they're always doing like all these distraction things. And then when that Iranian Quds Force general got killed, they started shooting way more accurate. Like they were directly hitting the embassy. People were out on runs in the embassy walls and mortars were landing next to them and they're going to the infirmary. Like, you know, they started to get pretty accurate after that. And then of course riots and stuff were also happening. And so when I left Iraq and I never went back to the Middle East, I essentially knew that was the end of my time there. Which wasn't the first run in that I had in the Middle East where, you know, I had a near death experience. But after that, I was kind of like, all right, I think I'm done. And I essentially kind of got smuggled out of the country. I was in a bus and they took me to this checkpoint, and this was right like a very small window. Like all the riots were happening for like 4 or 5 days straight. And I was past my time on contract. So the company was paying me out of pocket at that point and I wasn't working. So, but I was still in country. So they had to pay me. And yeah, they were like, all right, we have this tiny window to get you out of the country. And so they put me on a bus and I was by myself, like just with the driver. And I drove through all these fucking scary checkpoints. And I remember I like still see like cars on fire and shit. It was just insane. And I was like, dude, this is some Benghazi shit right here. Like
Yeah.
I was fucking terrified. That was like probably one of the one, and I didn't have a pistol either. I didn't have any firearms, no nothing. I was just fucking out there, just raw dogging it, dude. I was so fucking scared.
Just pure fisticuffs. Yeah.
That's right, man. I mean, like my plan was to fucking steal someone's gun or something, like, but they finally got me out of that area and to the airport. And then I still felt pretty and I have a dog, mind you, my dog, so that I'm like retiring with, like Ozzy, the dog that I brought home. That deployment, they at the very end, they were like, okay, we're losing the contract. The veterinarian signed off on my adoption paperwork and said, he's yours now. So like he no longer belonged to the company and he was my dog. And I'm like leaving Iraq, getting smuggled out of the country with me and this dog. Like, and I get on this airplane and I was like, holy shit, just get me the fuck out of this country. And I flew into Jordan and I was like, all right, thank God I'm out of there. And then when I didn't really relax though, because like I was still obviously in another country, didn't have a gun. You know, your sense of awareness is super heightened. You know, you're in Cooper's color code like red, always alert. And yeah, anyways, like hop on my flight in Jordan, in Amman, back to the United States. And at that point, then I felt safe. I was like, all right, I'm finally getting out of here. And I had my dog, and I landed in Chicago, and got a rental, and I drove straight to Tennessee. And I was like, holy shit, man, it's all over. And like that sadly was the end of my canine career. But it was a while to go for the better half of 9 years. And so I was pretty happy to finally, kind of call it there at the end of that. And then shortly after that, I kind of worked some part-time jobs, and then I moved to Montana and do what I do now. But yeah, those were some wild days back then for sure.
So 5 years Marine Corps, mostly as a handler, and then 4 years contracting with State Department as a handler.
Right. Yeah, I say 4 years, but it was realistically more like 3, and I took a long break in between contracts. So when I came back from Afghanistan, I switched contracts. So the contract I was working in Afghanistan was actually a how do I put this? It was a prospect contract. So like the company that I was working for was like, hey, we're going to partner with this other contractor, and you guys are going to have a contract in Afghanistan subcontracting for this other company. And so they picked me and 2 other handlers to be the forerunners for this contract. And we go out there, and needless to say, it just failed terribly. It did not work. Like the logistics of the 2 companies trying to get together and hash out pay and rotations and transport from the 2 countries was immensely difficult. And it just didn't work out. And so essentially we didn't go back to working in Afghanistan with that company after that. And so I came back, and they were like, hey, where do you want to go next? And I was like, I'll just go back to Iraq, go back to Baghdad. And they also had other contracts available too. They had Erbil in northern Iraq, and then they also had Basra in southern Iraq too. And I was like, no, I'll just go back to Baghdad. Like, I like Baghdad. I know all my friends there at the embassy. And so I just chose to go back there. And then shit got kind of spicy. So
Yeah, and mate, if you don't mind, is my microphone still okay? Is that all right? I've just turned the volume up but moved it further away. And for people listening, I've only just got the new camera, the new setup, the microphone, so that's why it's. I'm hoping this first episode is not going to be a bit funky sound and video wise, but
no, it's good. I'm still using the the Apple headphones. So
oh, bro, some of that stuff, some of the simple stuff like these headphones I normally use, it just works, man. It just works so much better. There's nothing wrong with it, bro. But yeah, like chronologically, can you just, like, obviously not every detail, it's a lot of stuff, but can you just take us through to the deployments? So you've gone from the Marine Corps, you didn't want to re-enlist because they're going to fuck you around, and then you've gone to the State Department. Can you just give us the summary again of what the State Department is?
Sure thing. Yeah. So like I was kind of describing to you before we started the podcast, I was explaining kind of how different countries, quote unquote, state departments work. And so the United States State Department and their foreign policy and their diplomatic, everything that they do there is in the United States. For our government, we use the Department of Homeland Security, I believe, and or just the State Department. I'm sorry, it's the Department of State. It's not Department of Homeland Security. The Department of State is all of our like foreign everything. So it's like our diplomacy, our embassies, it's all that stuff. So essentially they have actual employees that work for the State Department, and those are your DSS guys are like your diplomatic security dudes. So they're actually like working for the government, not subcontractors. They're getting a federal pension, all that stuff. So they actually work for the State Department. And then to fill in the massive workforce that they do need for working in diplomatic security, they hire subcontractors. Subcontractors do all of the bulk work for everything on the embassy, which includes logistics, food, ammo, people, like vehicles, you name it. Like all of that are civilians. So, and we're working as subcontractors for all this. So as you can imagine, it's an immense amount of paperwork like that you have to go through to get to this point. So, but to get to your point about chronologically, I'm just wrapping up. That's like what State Department does, and how your contractors work for the State Department. And it's also, I'll just say this really quick. It's insanely like meticulous and anal. They're very, very, very picky. One fuck up, you're gone. You're never contracting ever again. Like
Really?
you drink while you're in country, gone. You have an ND, you shoot your gun by accident, gone, out of country. Like everything. They're so fucking strict. It's not funny. You pop hot on a piss test for testosterone, not even a recreational drug or a controlled substance, like even just testosterone, hot on a piss test, gone. You're gone. Like they're really strict. Um, anyways, back to the chronological. So I get out of the Marine Corps, October 2015, and I'm kind of recently married, and I immediately I'm trying to figure out what it is that I'm gonna do. And so at this point, I am a stay-at-home husband, lazy piece of shit, sitting on the couch playing video games, drinking beer, because I just got out of the military, so I can do whatever the fuck I want. And yeah. And so, anyways, I was like, all right, well, I really need to quit fucking around and I need to get a job. And so I started looking at work, and I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to do something, that applies to, my career. So working in dogs, I thought about training. I thought about actually working for TSA, but both of those things were extremely challenging. Being a dog trainer for people are stupid. So like, I just didn't want to work with stupid people. Dogs aren't stupid. The owners are stupid. And so like, I just didn't really feel like training people, which is really what it boiled down to. We're not talking about like intelligent people that know dogs. We're talking about owners, like pet owners and stuff. Like I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And working for TSA was a dead end. It's a very hard job to get into. It's extremely competitive. And so I just gave up on that right away. And I knew a few other dudes that have got out before I got out, and they all started contracting in the Middle East. And they were making damn good money. Like, I mean, I'm talking, they're making like $500+ a day. And some are making way more than that. Some are making 800 a day. Like, it was crazy, some of these contracts and some of this money these guys were rolling in. And I was like, fuck, I want to go do that. Like, I want to go make some fat paychecks. Like, sounds fun. I get to go to the Middle East, and I was getting paid a lot of money, and I was also getting fulfillment for me personally and professionally. I signed up in the Marine Corps to deploy and go to the Middle East, and when all that got pulled out from under me, I felt really jaded, and like I just felt like a piece of me was missing, and I was like, I have to go do this. Like, I have to go to the Middle East and satisfy this itch that I've been working for my 18 to 21 years old, 22 years old. Like, I got to go do this. 24. And so yeah, I sent my first resume to a contracting company, and I shotgunned a bunch to like all these different companies. And at this point, they can't hire people fast enough. Like, so needless to say, I sent my resume out, and in 30 minutes, I got a response. And they said, we want to hire you right away. Like, don't listen to any other contractor, like whatever, like just please, like, let us hire you. And come to find out, I actually worked for a really great company. Out of all the competitors I could have worked for, I worked for the best one. I didn't know that at the time. I just accepted the job because they were the first one. And so, yeah, I got out in October 2016. 2015. And by April 2016, I was having a dog training, and I was about to deploy to Iraq. So like really super quick turnaround. And yeah, working for the State Department was it's a lot of jumping through some hoops. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of certifications, a lot of tests, all that stuff. Even as a civilian, you're still having to do it. Work visas, like weapons qualifications, like so much extra bullshit. When the military is just very straightforward. Like, if you're going to the Middle East, you're with the U.S. military. You hop on a plane, you fly over there, you do your thing, you come back. State Department, it's like you're a civilian doing all this stuff, and it requires a fuck ton more paperwork and all this other stuff. And like the dog training part was super easy. I got my dog assigned to me, trained my dog for 4 weeks, I certified, and then head straight over. Like, that part was easy. It's all the other bullshit that's hard to get through. But anyways, yeah, deployed to Baghdad, Iraq in 2016, get directly attached to the U.S. ambassador's protection detail, mostly due to my experience in the Marine Corps. Because at this point, working as a contractor for the State Department, I'm also getting lumped into a group of individuals that are prior law enforcement canine handlers, guys that are like dog professional, like Schutzhund dog trainers and stuff, and then also veterans. So like I'm working with other people from other branches, you know, that are also getting in this line of work just like I am. And so it's competitive. And so when I am being selected, it's out of my hands. I don't get to pick. My kennel master gets to pick who I work for. And so as I'm working in Baghdad, there's two different jobs you work for. You work for BSEF, Baghdad Embassy Security Force, or you work for APD, Ambassador Protection Detail. And so at that time, you know, I'm like 24 years old. I'm in the best shape of my life. I can run, you know, crazy fucking mile, like three mile time, you know, like sub 20 minutes. Like I'm running like a fucking 17-minute, like 3 mile. It's like insane. And yeah, I also my weapons qualifications, expert and everything, like, you know, my radio stuff, all this other shit the Marines gave me that I have this great knowledge base in, plus all of my training and experience, like in the Marine Corps for the 5 years. Needless to say, like my kennel master is like, all right, you're going to APD like straight away. So I get attached to Ambassador Protection Detail Team 13, and I show up and I it's like my first day at work, and I was like, hey guys, I'm your new dog handler and stuff, and I'm also in history, I'm the youngest person to ever be on an APD team. I was 24, and the average team of everyone at the average age of everyone on the team is 30 to 50 years old. Like all prior, you know, special forces guys, of course, you know, so the team I was working with was all prior force reconnaissance Marines. There was an Army Delta guy there, a Ranger, like all top-notch guys. Like, you know, they all have very extensive careers in the military before even coming to contracting. And so, yeah, I get attached to APD 13, and my first day at work, I'm like sitting in the vehicle and they're like walking me through the radios, and he was like, yeah, this is how you program like the 152 and stuff. And I was like, oh, I used a 152 in the Marines. I already know how to do all this shit. And the guy's name is Mark. He gets out of the vehicle and he stands up and he's like, hey guys, the new guy knows how to use the radio. We're going to be good. And then so everyone was like, fuck yeah, like sweet, you know? And I remember feeling this like immense sense of belonging and like pride, you know, and being like, oh man, thanks for the Marines, like teaching me all this like actual useful information and applying it now. And so needless to say, after that, man, me and APD 13 were thick as thieves. Like, and also mind you, before I say this next part, the culture of being a dog handler and working at the embassy is the dog handlers do not associate with anybody else. The dog people just stay with the dog people. They go to the gym together. They go to chow together. You don't sit with anybody else in the chow hall. Like you go to work together. They don't mingle with anybody else at the embassy. And so when I started working with APD 13 and I'm working very close with my team, like we're going on missions to the red zone and the green zone and like high stress environment, working for the U.S. ambassador, like I'm on his advanced team. So I'm out searching the meeting area before the ambassador shows up in a separate detail and making sure there's no explosive devices or threats that's going to blow up my team or the ambassador himself. And so I'm like, you know, really stressed out, want to focus really good. So I'm spending a lot of time with my team. You know, I'm going to mission briefings, getting intelligence on the areas that we're going to. I'm studying the routes. Like, you know, I learn all the different vehicles. I'm going to training with these guys, doing down vehicle drills, going to the range. And I'm doing this all with my dog too. So like, I'm very embedded with this team, and I start going to the gym with them. I start going to chow with them. I'm sitting at the chow hall with them. Like, I'm also hanging out with all the other like quote unquote operators. Like, and I'm just the dog guy, you know, and every other person I was working with was like starting to get jealous. They're like, oh, you think you're fucking cool now, huh? You just go hang out with all the operators. I was like, well, yeah, they're asking me to fucking hang out with them. So
we're all just a bunch of dudes, man. Hanging
working
out.
pretty, yeah, just a bunch of bros, like going to the gym, fucking lifting weights and, you know, eating a bunch of fucking protein and shit, and then going to the range and burning a few rounds. Like, but then we're going on a mission together and stuff. And I actually got to just really know these guys really well. I made some really good friends working in APD and got to know all their personal lives really well, and including their families and everything. And I feel like that's the whole reason you're there, is you're not there to do your job. You're there to work with the guy right next to you and protect him and bring him home. And my job as a dog handler is to ensure that that happens. And so, especially with a job like explosive detection, you miss an IED, they're dead, you're dead, and no one gets to go home. So it's like lots of stress involved with that. And so moving forward from APD, I come back to the United States after that deployment, and into the office, and they're like, "Hey, our program manager wants to talk to you." And normally that's never a good thing. It's like the same thing as being in the military and like, "Hey, first sergeant wants to talk to you." You're like, "Fuck, I'm in trouble."
In his office, yeah.
Yeah, and you're like, "Fuck, like what I do, I'm in trouble," And so I have this same feeling of going and talking to the program manager, like I got in trouble or I did something and I didn't do anything. And he goes, "Yeah, like, shut the door behind you." And I'm like, "Oh fuck, like, yeah, I'm definitely in trouble." And so I shut the door.
His business lit off. Fuck, damn it.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh fuck," and I was like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And he goes, "I want to talk to you about this first, because since you've started working here, you have just made leaps and bounds, like as an employee for the company and making us look really good, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not trying to like, blow myself up here. I'm just like saying what happened." And he goes, "We really want to consider you to represent the company and go work on this contract in Afghanistan, subcontracting for this other company. And we're only sending 3 people, and you're the first person we asked. Like, we really like you. We want you to go and represent our company." And I would just like, dude, my heart about exploded. I was like, "Holy shit, this is really cool!" Like, awesome. And so they're like, "Yeah, you're gonna get a new dog. You're gonna go to this place and establish all this and be the forerunner for this contract for our company." And I was like, "Hell yeah, that sounds cool." And I really wanted to go to Afghanistan. Like, going to Iraq was really cool, but I signed up in the Marine Corps and the military because I really wanted to go to Afghanistan. My cousin had been to Afghanistan. Everyone who I had known in my Marine Corps unit all deployed to Afghanistan. Like, it was a thing inside of me I just needed to do. And so the moment they said, "Yeah, you're going to Afghanistan," I was like, "I'm going to get to do this. I'm going to get to fill this void in my life that I've always wanted to fill." And I absolutely was like excited. I was like, "Yes, I will go, like 100%. And so the contract was in Kabul, Afghanistan, subcontracting for the State Department, but then I was subcontracting for another company that was subcontracting for the State Department. So imagine this company is subcontracting for them, and then we're just like a small entity branched off from that, working at a different compound that no one else is kind of working at the time. And we're essentially helping them fill their numbers. Because that's how it worked there. Like, they need dog handlers and they need dogs to fill, and trainers and kennel masters to like fill all of these numbers, because it's such high tempo rotations. We're working 105 days on and coming back for 2 weeks and then coming right back. Like, so these people have all this turnover, and like people are quitting, or like all these other companies are buying up people, like saying like, "Oh, come work for us, we have it better." And so people are also leaving companies and going and working for other companies, getting poached, essentially, is what we used to call it. And so, yeah, I go to Afghanistan and I work there. And yeah, different world, like just so much different than Iraq. And the culture was so much different. Even so, flying into Iraq on my first deployment, we fly into Amman, Jordan first, and then stay the night at this hotel. You catch a flight the next day, and then you fly into Baghdad. Regular commercial flight, Royal Jordanian, I think was the airline. When we flew into Afghanistan, I didn't even get my passport stamped. I flew in totally under the radar, literally. Multi-letter agency I won't mention on the podcast, but I essentially flew in unrecorded, undocumented. We flew in blackout conditions. The whole cab of the aircraft was dark. The only people wearing night vision goggles were the pilots. We were flying under the radar at night so that we wouldn't be shot down by surface to air missiles, And so that was my experience. First thing flying in Afghanistan, I was like, "Fuck, what did I get myself into?" Because mind you, when you're contracting, you're there voluntarily. You're not there in a military unit like where your unit's deploying. Like, I essentially was like, "Yes, I will go." And so I'm flying in, and I'm like fucking nerve wracked now, like, holy shit. And before I got there, a bunch of my friends were already contracting on this specific contract, but they were contracting for another company. And so I knew I was going to meet some friends. As soon as I got off the plane, the first person I was going to meet was a guy I knew. And so that for me was a big relief. And so I land, didn't get shot down out of the sky, thank God, and hop in a Toyota Hilux and fucking drive off the tarmac. And first person I see is this guy named Sable, and he was a massive influence on me. He was one of my trainers in the Marine Corps. He was also one of my instructors at Basic Handlers course when I was in the Marines. And so I've known this guy for a long time. And I was like, holy shit, dude, I can't believe I'm actually seeing this guy right now in Afghanistan, like crazy. And so he gets me all checked in and stuff like that. The next day I hop on a helicopter and actually fly to the base I'm assigned and check in. And I work there the entire time, and I'm going to the main embassy every now and then just to go to the bazaar. And funny enough, actually, I was actually ran into some Australian guys working there too. They were all working there, a bunch of Dutch guys, Jordanians, and not Jordanians, Georgians, and every NATO partner force you can think of in Afghanistan is at that location at the time. And so
these active duty guys, or are they like Aussie contractors?
Yes. Yeah, okay, gotcha. Those are actual Aussie enlisted personnel officers working there in country. And I'm still the contractor, like working for some other folks and whatever. But yeah, really cool time in Afghanistan. Culturally, people totally different. Culture is totally different. Even how they say salam alaikum is different. Like in Iraq, you say salam alaikum, and then like it's two separate words. And then in Afghanistan, it's like salama alaikum. Like the A is connected to the salama alaikum. Different pronunciation. And and of course there they also speak, Farsi, Pashtun, Dari, Russian, Uzbek, like so many, like all these other different languages too. It's not just Arabic
and whatever.
Yeah, Tajik and all these other like essentially tribal languages, and so different culture for sure in Afghanistan. My girlfriend's dog is laying down right here. She's now sunbathing in the sun.
That's right. Roddy's up there trying to intimidate people going on their Sunday stroll. So
nice, yeah. And so, yeah, Afghanistan was also incredibly dangerous. So I worked on a compound, which was essentially kind of far out of town, but it was referred to as like the operator compound. So that's where all of the PSD guys that I used to work with APD, we called it being mobile. So when I was talking about earlier, we had the BSEF contract and the APD contract. BSEF, Baghdad Embassy Security Force, is a static contract. And then APD is a mobile contract. So you're driving around in town disguised as, a local national. So in Iraq, I'm dressed up in a suit. I have a mustache. I look like an Iraqi male. And in Afghanistan, you're wearing these pieces of garb right here. You're wearing the scarves.
Yeah,
and the pakal right here. So very, very common Pakistani, Afghan piece of local clothing, traditional clothing that you're wearing. So we're all dressed up like that in man dresses also. So, and you're wearing your kit underneath all of this stuff too. So you're wearing like a low pro kit with your magazines, your radio, your IFAK, all that stuff, and your pistol underneath your man dress kind of deal. Or at least you may have a man dress on with all of your body armor underneath that, but then your magazines and stuff are like accessible on your hip. And then you're wearing like an actual shawl blanket, that's very common there to wear as well. And that's covering up all your main stuff, like your rifle and whatever. And so those guys, I was working at the operator compound, but I wasn't working a mobile contract. I was working a static contract at the mobile compound. So it was kind of funny because all the other dog handlers hated me because I would go hang out with all the mobile guys because I used to be mobile. So plus one of my other friends that was working there, Brandon, was a mobile guy, and I would just go hang out with him like every night. I would go to the gym with him and his team and shit. So everyone fucking hated me for going and hanging out with the mobile guys yet again. But that was just the culture. Like when you're a mobile guy, you just fit in with the same guys. You're doing the same stuff. But anyways, yeah, dangerous time, lots of EBIDs, lots of personal born IEDs. So suicide vests going off, uh, rockets, mortars, all that kind of shit. So one day I went to the gym right after chow, and I was working out in the gym, and it's a big quad con, so it reverberates and makes a lot of noise inside of it. So when someone drops a free weight, it sounds like an explosion. And so we were working out, and this loud boom goes off, and we're kind of like, oh, maybe someone dropped a weight, and there's music and stuff playing too. So like we're all kind of like unsure. So I was like, I'll go check really quick. So I go outside, open the door, and yeah, like the duck and cover alarm's going off, and they're like, get to a bunker, like et cetera and shit. And I was like, oh, let's fucking go. Like, like, yeah, explosion. And so after doing the BDA, like the battle damage assessment or whatever, the rocket, someone shot a mortar. Someone shot an RPG at our compound, and the room I lived in was right next to one of the walls, and the rocket actually landed like 100 feet away from my room. And so, it's not really to say that it could have happened, but like, what if the wind was just blowing a tiny bit different that day, and I was in my room playing video games, and yeah, the rocket just fucking blew my ass up in my room. So it kind of was a little scary at that point. That was the first thing that happened there. And then probably a couple days later, we got mortared, and then indirect also. And so, but it was enough to just kind of be like, holy fuck, I'm here, and it's happening, and this is what I wanted. And it was kind of scary. And then a few months go by, and this is when the really scary day happened. This is like one of the days that changed my life. And a lot was going on in my personal life at the time too. I was having a big time trouble with my marriage, and things were really rocky, and I'm on this deployment to try to make some money and everything else. And so anyways, this one day, I'm searching at the checkpoint, and there's a bolo out for a white, Toyota Corolla, 4 military age males, suicide vests, AKs, the whole get up. The vehicle is also an IED. And it rolls into my checkpoint, and I was like, holy fuck, this is it. Like, I'm going to die. And so the checkpoint immediately gets shut down, and the vehicle, essentially, like, a gate closes behind them, but it wasn't closed fast enough, and the vehicle backs out, and these guys don't detonate. But it was 100% like the actual bolo, it was the bomb that was meant for me, like, for sure. And I couldn't believe it, like, that it didn't happen, that it didn't blow up, and I didn't get blown up. And so much happened in that, like, short moment, and I rethought my entire life, like, in a span of 30 seconds. It's like when people say when you die, your life like flashes before your eyes. Like, in a way, that kind of happened. Like, I didn't die, but like, I kind of thought I was going to die. And I thought about everything I had done up to that point, and like why I was there. And immediately after that, I was like, I want to go home. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. Like, this isn't worth it. And I also decided at that point too, like, I know this podcast is about my professional career, but in my personal life, I chose to get divorced at that point. I realized that my life was worth more than what, and in my personal life, it wasn't really working either. And I was like, yeah, I just want to be happy, and I'm not going to put myself through this anymore. And so I decided I was going to get divorced, and then I was going to quit contracting, essentially. And so I didn't die, and then still had to go through some stuff and jump through some hoops, to finally get back to the United States. And needless to say, I got out and left that contract, got divorced, and then I was kind of just floating through life a little bit. And I was like, all right, well, I also lost a ton of money in my divorce, and I was essentially broke. And I was like, well, fuck, I've got to make some money back. So then I decided to hop back into contracting. And that's where, chronologically, I was telling you, there was that year gap. For that whole year, I didn't work. I essentially lived off my savings account for money that I did have from previous deployments. And then I signed up to go back to Iraq. That took some time. And then I finally got on that third deployment. And then after I did it, I realized the company I was working for was just failing, and they got acquired by another company. And I did all that work and waited a whole year to get back on this contracting thing again. And then I essentially just quit contracting, mostly because it was like intercompany politics. And so I was like, yeah, I'm done with it. And yeah, I left all of dog handling and contracting behind. And then, yeah, I moved to Montana essentially. And then I do what I do now, working for the U.S. Forest Service in wildland fire, and then ranching in the winter time for ranches. And funny enough, actually, I'm leaving wildland fire because I'm actually taking a job this summer as a packer. And what that is somebody that takes mules or horses and you put loads on them of equipment or supplies, and you pack those through the mountains to another location and you drop it off. And so I'm essentially doing that now for the U.S. Forest Service as a packer, but I'll still be doing like a little bit of wildland fire stuff. But yeah, no more canine, no more contracting. So
Yeah. And
chronologically, that was all that shoved into one long story. So
it's good. I got a couple of like sort of smaller questions. So that very first deployment, you said that was probably your favorite one, right? Like that was your of three that you did, you liked that one the best.
mm-hmm.
Did you
Yeah, no
did you
doubt.
get like operationally? Did you get any fines in any of those like advance party searches, or were you pretty lucky there was nothing really there for a lot of those meetings and
So
whatnot?
very, very fortunate. No positive finds. The only false positive I had was in Afghanistan, searching a vehicle there one day at a checkpoint. Turned out to be nothing, thank God, because then, of course, we fast forward to the story where that Bolo fucking ID comes in, and I was like, oh, fuck, But yeah, no, working on APD on my first deployment, did not have any fines. I was very, very thankful that I didn't actually. It was a dangerous time, dangerous place. And how I view that deployment is that I kept everybody safe and brought everyone back home to their families, and represented myself and my company in a very positive way there. And I also represented, being a Marine. Also, I'm still carrying, that pride with me and like representing the Marine Corps as a veteran, in being like, oh, yeah, Marine dog handler veteran, these guys are good to go, et cetera, et cetera. Like, so in that deployment, I viewed part of my career a major success there, as far as just making sure everyone was safe and got them home. And also some just like really funny stories too on that deployment. There was like this time I was searching in an alley and these wild dogs like start attacking me and my team, and we're throwing rocks at them and shit. It was just crazy time. There was a lot of reasons why that deployment was my favorite. And at the end of it, my team, they personally came up to me and they said, hey, we really enjoyed you working on our team for this deployment, and we've never had a dog handler like you work for us before, and you set the bar pretty high. And they actually gifted me a flag as a momentum, to take with me, and it was an Iraqi flag that they had. And so that was really cool. It wasn't like brand new or anything. It was like a very old, like war torn looking flag. And so
Yeah, they just had it on a
that's
shelf waiting.
yeah, no doubt. Yeah, no, it's funny. They actually stole it, but
I know.
it's
I was just sort of baiting you into that one. I was like, you don't have to say it if
right.
you don't want that. It's like
Yeah,
the
no,
Iraqi
they
government's going to be like, we've been looking for that flag. Like, what the fuck?
yeah, and I'm not gonna say where it came from, but it was a government standard flag. It's a very fucking huge flag. I mean, it's like it covers the size of one of my walls in my basement. And then when I got it, I was like, fuck, how am I gonna steal this? Like, get it out of the country, you know what I mean? And
It's like a
so
rug. Yeah.
dude, it's huge. Yeah. And I was like, fuck, I just essentially like had a couple sea bags, and I shoved a bunch of dirty clothes in them, and I put it at the very bottom. And one thing about Middle Eastern culture is like they really don't like dirty clothes and like shoes and women's undergarments and tampons and all that stuff. And so guys have these horror stories of flying over and they don't protect their shit, and they just like the Iraqis just or Jordanians just ravage their fucking their luggage and stuff. They get all sorts of shit stolen out of it. And so I put a bunch of dirty laundry on top of it, and then I also put my shoes upside down because they don't like feet or like the bottoms of your shoes. It's actually a major offense. Like to show someone the bottom of your feet in a Middle Eastern country is like giving someone the middle finger. It's like very offensive. But anyways, got it out of the country. So and then on my third deployment, this leash right here that you can see on the wall that's hanging up,
I've been looking at
Uh,
that. Yeah.
this is probably, if I had a house fire right now, that leash would probably be one of the things that comes out of this house with me. Every single dog I've ever worked in my entire career, including training dogs, because at one point, um, when I was in between contracts, that third year I was telling you about, in between my second and third deployment, I strictly just trained dogs for my company. So I would just every day show up to work, have a trailer full of dogs, train them all. That was my job every day. And this leash right here, I worked every single dog in my entire career, 9 years on this exact leash. So it's very personal item for me. You know, it has a lot of personal value. Um, and anyways, on my third deployment, I was trying to get out of Iraq, and they were haggling me about this leash. They were like, "You can't take this." And they were trying to steal it from me essentially. And I was getting into a screaming match with the guards at like the Iraqi guards, like the soldiers at the airport. And I was like gonna fist fight them for this leash. Like, I mean, I worked blood, sweat, and tears into this fucking leash, and they were just trying to fucking steal it from me. And
Insane.
eventually I asked for like their commanding officer, and he came over, and I was like, "Look, I work for the State Department. If you fucking steal this from me," I was like, "I will have your fucking job." And he said, just go. And I took the leash and walked out, and I didn't have to worry about anything. And then in the next checkpoint, I shoved it down my pants because I didn't want him to steal it. So,
Got the
and they
same
never
stupid
searched,
argument.
they never pat me down or searched me for it. And I was like, I'm not fucking losing this thing. And eventually they stole a bunch of other shit though. They stole a couple of my carabiners and like rope for some fucking reason. And honestly, I don't even know why I had the fucking rope, but you never know when you're going to need some rope, you know, just like in the movie Boondock Saints, you know, he's like, "Well, go get your fucking rope," you know? And then later on, they're like rappel down the ceiling and they have the fucking rope. So you never know when you're going to need it, I guess. But yeah, long story short, that was all that jazz and
Yeah.
whatnot. So, but
Bro,
yeah, deployment favorite.
take me through that leave that being smuggled out of Iraq one. What was with that? Why did you have to be smuggled out? Is that just purely because contract ended because of your predetermined date that you had? It ended, and then maybe there was a logistics error, you couldn't get out, and it was like, oh fuck, we've got to do it this way. Or was
That
it like
that you just
you
no,
fucking
yeah, you
shot
just said
someone?
it like no, 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 no. Like now that does happen though. Like that didn't happen to me personally, but if the rules of engagement are totally different than the Department of Defense's rules of engagement. So like if you fire your weapon, you're going home because like you're gonna and then even if it's out of self-defense, like because the way they view it is that you're a civilian. So you're in Iraq on a work visa. So if you fire your weapon out of self-defense, like you're going to prison in Iraq. So essentially, you will get fucking sent out of the country that day that it happens so that you don't go to prison. It's
Yeah.
like insanely strict and weird waters to navigate as far as contracting there. And then you have like the DOD and you're protected because you're in the military and you're doing your job. But like when you're a contractor, it's like you're a civilian doing everything. So you're subject to taxes, you're subject to law enforcement there, like prison, everything. Like it's very strict. Um, but yeah, essentially that didn't happen to me where I fired my weapon or anything like that. I just was there past my contract date, but the reason I was there past the contract date was because all these riots were happening. And so the entire embassy is surrounded by angry people throwing Molotov cocktails, like burning flags, like, they're fucking pissed. And it's not necessarily the Iraqi people that are mad at us. It's actually like Iranian backed militias that were pissed because Trump killed that Iranian Quds Force general, Al Soleimani, or whatever his name was. They were pissed because of that. And so these people that are out there doing the riots and the protesting aren't your just normal run of the mill Iraqi civilian people walking down the street, men, women, and children. These are all military age males from the Iranian like militias that are directly trying to disrupt our operations at the embassy or military operations. Like they're directly trying to just like throw everything off. And so the riots are so bad, I cannot leave the embassy. Like they have every gate surrounded. the whole embassy was on lockdown. Like all the doors are shut. People are standing at the gates with up armored trucks with 240 Bravos on top, belt fed machine guns, like ready for them to storm the embassy. Like that's how serious this is. The embassy was getting evacuated. Like that's how bad it was. They were taking non-essential personnel and they were saying, you guys are hopping on a helicopter and getting out of here. And come to find out, dog handlers are on the last list of people to get evacuated, along with the DSS security guys and the PSD people. So and like the U.S. Marines that are at the embassies that are guarding, that are on like Marine Security Program. They're actually, we're all the last people to leave the embassy. So we're the last line of defense essentially, because we're trained for it. So I turn in my weapon and all my gear and my radio and everything like that. And I'm like fully expecting to hop on this bus with a few other handlers, and it's the end of our contract to go back to the United States. And like, no, like all these riots happen. And they're like, guess what? You're fucking staying here. You might as well go back to the armory and check your guns back.
Say,
and so I did.
Yeah,
I did. Yeah. So immediately I was like, well, fuck. I guess I'm going back to the armory. So I went back to the armory and checked out my pistol and my rifle, and also went back to like the gear issue, and I got my I didn't go get my radio, but I got my body armor back. So I got my body armor and my pistol and my rifle, and that was kind of all I really needed, to make it out if something shit hit the fan or whatever. But yeah, and then I remember I was just kind of hanging out for like 3 days or so. And then finally one day they just said, wait in your room. They were like, wait in your room. And if we have an opening, like we will come get you, and you need to be ready like immediately. And I was like, okay. And so and we're talking about like ground transportation. So no helicopters flying out, just a truck or like a bus, like taking me to the airport.
Yeah.
And I was like chilling. And then it was like right after lunch or something. And they said, we got to go right now. Like now's the time. Like go take your weapons and leave them at this checkpoint and lock them up. And then we'll turn them into the armory for you, and leave your body armor right here. We'll turn it back in and grab your dog and get on this bus right now. And I didn't even have time to say goodbye to my friends. Like I had at that time, I think 3 or 4 buddies that I knew very well, either from working in the Marines with or for prior contracts that I knew for 3 years or so, or 5 or more years. And I only said bye to one of my friends. That was it. And I said, hey man, it was good working with you. I got to go. Like, but yeah, I wasn't allowed to go say bye to everybody, and do my like farewells kind of thing. I just said bye to one dude, and mostly just because I saw him as I was leaving. I was like, hey man, bye. And he was like, all right, dude, good luck. And I was like, fuck, man. Like I'm going to get mobbed by a group of people out here and taken off the bus. And I'm thinking like some fucking Black Hawk Down shit. Like they're going to take my clothes off and fucking, parade me around and shit. And I was like, I don't want this shit to happen at all. Like that's kind of scary. And so, yeah, probably like shit in my pants getting on this bus with my dog and getting through these checkpoints. And I'm just so alert, like so scared. And finally get to the airport and I'm like, fuck, here we go. And I was on my own, like no gun, no nothing, like just hop in the airport, get on my flight and get the fuck out of there. And fortunately I did and got out of country. And yeah, after that, I never looked back. I never thought about contracting ever again after that. So, and then fast forward a couple of years, and we, the whole Kabul, Afghanistan evacuation and how that went. And I remember, I mean, I worked there at that embassy, and like I remember specifically when the Taliban are taking over and all these Marines are doing their best to defend all these employees and these civilians to try to get them out of Afghanistan and Kabul at HKIA. And I just remember seeing after this, like photos and videos of exact locations I used to work at. Like I used to stand right on that corner or cross this street to go to work every day, or I used to go to this bazaar to talk to this one person. And the Taliban are now standing there in full broad daylight being like, this is our shit now. And the US embassy, they're standing, the Taliban are inside the US embassy and they said, it's our embassy now. And like that as an entire process was insane, seeing that on the news, and I'm like, holy shit, I used to work there. Like that could have been me, or, and unfortunately, um, I was working with some guys in wildland fire that were prior Marines, and they knew people that were there that unfortunately were killed that day when that IED and killed those 13 Marines. My buddy, he served with about 2 or 3 of those guys that got killed. And so for that day, it was a very somber day for us. It was actually a lot like 9/11, to be honest. It had like the same exact atmosphere of like knowing people that got killed, but I didn't know them exactly. But my friend is grieving for his friends that died. And it's like, I'm friends with them and they were Marines. So it's like, my brothers and sisters over there too, and, the whole Marine Corps. So it's like that whole day was like a mournful day for, anyone that was in the Marine Corps to suffer that. But then me specifically too, as a contractor working there at Kabul, Afghanistan. And so that was just a sad time, sad day.
Yeah, it was definitely pretty hectic, man. I remember I've spoken to a few guests on this show about that withdrawal and what it sort of meant to them, because they'd served in Afghanistan in varying capacities.
Absolutely.
And I mean, did it leave a bit of taste in your mouth, or was it just the tragedy of the whole situation?
You know, I given this administration that we live under now here in the United States, like looking at it as my professional opinion, it was a very big failed diplomacy. Like I think it could have been handled better, but it all just happened so quick and so inefficient that we lost our foothold there, and it was a major loss for us as a country, losing not just people there, but like our embassy and military installations and billions of dollars of weapons and equipment that now that the Taliban have. Like,
Yeah.
And I'm a veteran, I'm allowed to say this shit. Like, it pisses me the fuck off. Like, to see all that and know people that went over there and served our country and died. Like, mothers and fathers will never get their sons back. And now I do feel like that it was in vain. And even some dogs that died there too, like, protecting people. And that was all for nothing now. And so that for me, on a professional standpoint, I view it as a major failure. And personally, it pisses me off, even more so with our government. But also on a personal level, I was just so mournful. Like, I don't know how to explain the feeling that I was feeling that day, other than it was like a 9/11 event for me. It just was so heartbreaking, and I felt this immense sadness, like just not only for one day, it was like a week of this of happening. And like, I mean, at work I was not normal. Like, me and all my buddies that were Marines working at our fire station, like everyone was coming up to us and be like, are you guys okay? And we're like, no, we're not fucking okay. Like, it sucks. But we powered through it and still got the job done and stuff like that. But yeah, terrible, terrible fucking day.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, man. Yeah, I had a couple of mates that were there during that withdrawal, and they were saying they were just like butt stroking radios and stuff. Just there's like there was no official, hey, let's destroy all this, some of the crypto and some of the fucking like sensitive equipment. They were just like, all right, see ya. And then dudes at a tactical private level were like, I'm gonna fucking take my weapon to this radio because I'm not letting it get into the Taliban's hand. Like, they had
Yeah,
functioning helicopters. The most
dude,
hilarious part was watching them try
absolutely.
and
They
fly
had
helicopters.
everything from functional helicopters down to, M9 pistols and M4s and NVGs and helmets and body armor. And I hate to say this, they even left like some dogs behind too. Like, and I don't want to know what happened to the dogs because they don't like dogs there. So,
Yeah,
I hate to say that they probably died, but and if they didn't die because the Taliban killed them, they died because they got left behind in a kennel and like they died of heat exhaustion or dehydration or something like that. Like, I mean, that's how, if people don't understand, like in this podcast, that's how fast and kinetic this event was. Like, it went from people being like, all right, we need to evacuate, to like full on standoffs at gates with the Taliban looking right at you, being like, we're going to kill you and blow you up, like in a matter of like 24 hours. Like, so trying to, in the intelligence world and also in the diplomatic world, like if you're evacuating an embassy you're destroying every single piece of paper that has any kind of like sensitive material on it. If it's like got a top secret, a secret, whatever security clearance, like it's getting destroyed. It's getting burned or shredded. And you know, like you can't do that fast enough when the Taliban are literally on the bottom level of the building, storming the whole building and shit, you know. So needless to say, you know, with equipment and dogs and all that stuff, like I hate to say that I'm pretty sure that they got killed or left behind.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, man. And so you were already out of contracting at that point as well, right? You were in your
I
fire job.
was, yes,
Yeah,
I was working as a wildland fire uh, in my second year in wildland fire. So this was the year before last, and yeah, I was working in fire at that time. But like seeing it unfold on the news and hearing from my friend Matt of his friends that are actually there, and then guys getting blown up and then getting sent to Germany because they need a leg or you know something was just like fucking outrageous. Like I mean, I'm seeing direct text messages of people from their phone that are there being like, this whole situation's fucked. Like, we're going to die. And then seeing it unfold on the news and then seeing it from the firsthand perspective of people actually there was different than 9/11, of course, because, you know, 9/11, I don't know what the fuck's going on. I'm in like fifth grade, you
yeah, you're
know,
a kid,
fourth
yeah.
grade, fifth grade, something like that, second grade. I think I was in fifth grade. Um, but yeah, different perspective for sure of like all this stuff going on. Seeing it with firsthand knowledge of like text messages and shit going through, uh, made it much more of a personal event, I feel like.
Yeah. And have you found that the jobs you've done outside the Marine Corps have helped you sort of move on, like let
Yeah,
go of that type of stuff, if that makes sense? Like you're never not going to
yeah,
feel an emotion, but
right. I would say I held on to a lot of emotion after I got out of contracting. You know, from going from the Marine Corps to getting married and then divorced and then multiple deployments and then all of that period of 9 years was immensely stressful for me. I always had really bad insomnia. I was always stressed out. Like, you know, it was hard, like hard 9 years hard for anybody really, like doing that kind of line of work. Um, and, you know, going through a divorce also. And then after that, I, when I left my contracting job and I left Iraq and I had my dog and I brought him home, I was just kind of like, holy fuck, man, I just really went through a lot of shit. And, I was working a part-time job in construction and I was also a assistant manager for like a hardware store and life was not gratifying. In fact, I was probably drinking more than I should have been. I was getting drunk a lot and coping that way, which is not healthy. And I was like, I need to get the fuck out of here. Like, I mean, and I'm in my hometown also that I grew up in, so also not good either. Like, I know everybody and everyone knows me, and I'm like not doing good. And so I was like, I need to get the fuck out of here. And so when I was on my last deployment, I actually was reached out to by a buddy of mine who is a Marine also, but he was doing wildland fire in Montana. And he goes, "Hey, man, I think you should get out here. I think you would really like this. Like, wildland fire would suit you." And I told him I was looking for a job because I was leaving contracting and stuff. And so he goes, "Yeah, come out to Montana and I'll get you a job on a crew." And I was like, "Fuck yeah, that'll be sweet." And so I waited like a whole year because I missed the hiring window. It's seasonal, so I was in the
yeah.
wrong season. I was in wintertime and I needed to be in summertime to get hired. So I had to wait until next summer essentially. Excuse me. Anyways, fast forward to that, and I get out there to Montana, and I leave everything behind. I quit both my jobs. I actually got fired from one job because not because I did anything bad. Tennessee is a hire and fire at will state. They don't need a reason to fire you. And so when I told my boss I was leaving for another job, instead of just letting me go on good terms, he outright just fired me right on the spot. He goes, "Well, I don't need you anymore." So he just fired me. And
What
I
a
was like,
dog.
man, that was pretty fucked, dude. It really felt bad. I felt like I did something wrong and I was a bad employee and
You're like, you
all
can't
this other
fire
shit,
me. I
man.
quit.
Yeah. And I was kind of like, well, fuck you, dude. Like, and yeah, I left. And so I was also seeing a girl at the time and she broke up with me the same day I got fired. And I was like, dude, this is a sign. I need to fucking leave. And
Yeah.
so I didn't even wait. My job started in like 2 months, and this was in January, February, March. This was like right at the beginning of like March 1st. And I got fired. A girlfriend dumped me. And I was like, I came home. I was like, fuck it. I packed my truck up and I drove straight to Montana without a plan, nothing. I just said, fuck it. I was like, it's better than living here. So I just left and said bye to my family and everything. And I sold a bunch of shit and packed up my truck and I drove straight to Montana. And halfway to my trip to Montana, I saw on Facebook a buddy of mine actually was living in Missoula, and I was like, "Dude, are you living in Missoula, Montana?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Do you need a roommate by chance?" And he goes,
Nope.
"Actually, I fucking do." And I was like, "Dude, this was meant to be." And so, yeah, I got to Missoula and I lived with him for the whole summer and worked on that fire crew. And yeah, the rest is history. I did wildland fire for 3 whole years, working for the United States Forest Service. Um, and yeah, fighting some badass wildfires in the mountains. And it was so much fucking fun. I love it. And yeah, anyways, I was doing wildland fire in the summer and then I was ranching in the winter. And so I was really kind of balancing both. And I was trying to find a happy medium because I really liked fire, but I didn't love it. But I love working with horses and I love working with animals. It's like what I know. I've been doing it my whole life, whether it was horses as a kid or dogs as an adult. And then now I'm back to working horses again. And I was like, man, you know what? I really have to make a tough decision here. And I have to either choose working full time as a cowboy, which isn't really great. You know, make a lot of money and it's really hard work. And you usually live in some pretty shitty places. It's really or accept this job in wildland fire as a permanent employee and not really enjoy my personal life. I wouldn't have one. Essentially, I would just work 365 days a year as a wildland firefighter. And so I was like, man, I don't really know if I want to do that. And at the time, I was also like volunteering with some organizations. And one of those organizations I was working with is it's called Backcountry Horsemen of Montana. And it's an organization where people get together with their own personal horses and mules and they clear trails for like the national parks and like the national forests and stuff on their own time and stuff like that, just for recreation, for fun. But the Forest Service will oftentimes pay them, they contract them to go clear some of these trails or move some materials like supplies to resupply like lookout towers and stuff like that. So I was kind of interested in these guys and like I came down and volunteered and I have a saddle. It's sitting over there. And so I was like, yeah, I got a saddle and I got a rig and everything. Like if you got a horse for me to ride or a mule, like I'll come out with you guys and help you guys clear trails. And also the specific chapter I work for or work with, I should say, is a lot of older generation folks. So they're like people that have been doing this since like, the 50s, the 60s. And so they're older now. And so they can't really do a lot of the manual labor. And they rely on folks that are younger like me to come and help, cut some trees down or move some rocks out of the way and stuff. And so they're looking to pass that torch on essentially to this younger generation. And the same goes with packing too in the Forest Service. So fast forward to present day time right now. So end of my canine career and where I'm at currently as of like today, Friday. And on Monday, I start my full-time position job with the Forest Service as a packer. And how I got there was working with backcountry horsemen. They essentially loved how I was helping them so much that they put in a really good recommendation for me to the forest ranger at the West Fork Ranger District, and they needed another packer there. And they were like, well, you're a veteran, so we can direct hire you. I skip all the online paperwork bullshit. That's like honestly one of the best parts about being a veteran is that I get to get hired anywhere, anytime, and my resume goes to the top of the stack for a job application. So yeah, it's a really awesome benefit.
That's US wide across all the states.
It is. Yeah.
Hectic.
Yeah. So yeah, if you apply for a job anywhere in the United States as a veteran, your resume goes to the top of the stack of applications. And you also have what's called veteran preference, which means that a company looks better when they hire you because you are a veteran. So it essentially helps that company boost their numbers and like look better on paper and stuff
Bit
like
of a
that.
win-win sort of thing.
It's a win-win, yeah, for sure. And so yeah, they direct hired me, and yeah, I'll be working as a packer this summer, and it's also my permanent job. So I'll be working 6 months out of the year as a packer, permanent job for the Forest Service, and I work all summer in the backcountry in the woods and the mountains and the streams. Total isolation, no cell service, and also the forest I'm working on has 3 wilderness areas. So I'm sure in Australia you guys have national parks and like did areas and stuff like that. So it's like you can understand what I'm talking about. It would be like working in the national park, but in a really remote location. So I'm somewhat familiar with the continent of Australia. So I would assume it would be like working in like the Northern Territory almost, like pretty
Probably, yeah.
remote stuff out there. Like, I mean, imagine working on in Australia, they don't call them ranches, they call them stations. So for me, it would be like working on a station in the Northern Territory. Like it would be really crazy, actually. But that's what I'm working on here in Montana, with fucking grizzly bears and fucking wolves and moose and like everything else, man. It's a wild piece of country, and it's also extremely rugged. So the only way to get around there is by mules, is by horses. Like you have to pack everything everywhere and go on these tiny little mountain trails. Like, and you're looking down off to your left side and it's a cliff that's 300 feet down and there's rocks at the bottom. Like you get one wrong move and you're dead. So
Yeah.
it's,
Do you
I
have
guess,
dogs in any
I
of these
guess,
trips?
I personally don't have a dog. I really am thinking about getting one specifically just for this line of work, but I also want a cattle dog. So when I work ranches in the wintertime, I can just take my cattle dog with me and work cows with my horse. But then when I'm in the summer and I'm packing, they can just be my trail companion, essentially, keep me company, make sure the bears don't eat me. So,
Yeah.
but yeah. Yeah, no, but the other packer I do know that works at the ranger district I work with, she does have a dog, so she brings her dog on all of her pack trips.
Yeah, cool, man. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
sweet. And how often do you encounter things like bears and wolves and shit? I
You
mean, moose,
know,
I'm sure they're there all the time, but
a lot. I would say on an average summer basis, so 6 months, usually a bear interaction, whether it's a black bear or a grizzly bear, probably once a month. Depends on the location that you're working in, because like obviously the populations are denser in certain parts of Montana, and in some places there actually are no grizzly bears. I shouldn't really say that. There's probably a transient one or something around there somewhere, but it's just not as prominent as like say Western Montana or Northern Montana, or Central Montana too. Like I could just go out my door right now in my backyard. There's probably grizzly bears. Like the national forest boundary. You can't really see it because we're obviously inside, but like my property, I own 20 acres. It butts up right to national forest. So beyond my property boundary is the national forest, which is like fucking bear central. So, and I live right north of Yellowstone National Park. So it's immensely concentrated with grizzly bears. But yeah, on average, maybe once a month. And fortunately for me, all my interactions have been positive. I haven't had any bad interactions with bears or wolves or moose. I've had some really the worst interactions I've actually had are on horseback with moose, because the moose are in some of the country I'm in, and oftentimes where you're at, it's really dense. And so you just don't even know. You come around a corner and there's a fucking moose right there, and your horse is terrified of them. And also the moose are like extremely aggressive. So
and they're fucking huge, right? Like I
they're
went to
fucking massive, dude.
I went to
Yeah.
Colorado in 2019. We just did like a couple of day trips up the mountains and we saw some moose, and I was like, man, they are fucking huge. So, and they're pretty
Yep.
dangerous too, right?
So both are dangerous. The males, when they're in the rut, like mating season, insanely territorial. And they sound terrifying when they're fighting and stuff like that. I mean, if you're in the woods at night and you're hearing a bull moose, it's fucking terrifying, dude. It's some shit straight out of a fucking horror movie. And then the cows with their calves, insanely defensive. So if you see a calf, you don't want to go anywhere near it because like the mom is around somewhere. I mean, like on a serious level, like they are more dangerous than bears. I feel like in some ways, because the cow will charge you and just stomp the living fuck out of you until you're dead.
Yeah.
And the bears will also do that too. They'll fucking maul you, but like I feel like the bears won't really kill you. They just kind of fuck you up for a little bit and then leave you alone. But like the moose will actually fucking kill you. So way more terrifying for sure if you run into a moose that's aggressive. And I was actually gathering cattle with my boss, and my girlfriend was actually with me too. And we're going to this location to go grab a few cows in this like really tight draw. And my girlfriend's in the back riding her horse, and I'm in the middle. And then my boss and my friend are in the front. And I see my boss's horse freak out, and then my horse is just acting totally normal. And then I turn around, and my girlfriend's horse is freaking out. And I was like, what is going on? And she's like, I yelled moose. And I look over to my right, and there's a moose like fucking 50 yards going up the hill away from us, thank God. But I walked right fucking by it, and it didn't charge us, and it was a big cow. And it was, I mean, I was like, holy fuck. And that was like probably my third or fourth run in with moose, but like that one was the closest one I got to one for sure. And then wolves, they usually try to stay away from people because they can be hunted. So, and the biggest, craziest wolf story I have is I was actually in northern Idaho in the Panhandle on a fire assignment, and we were sleeping up in the high country in the mountains at a spike camp. So there's maybe probably like 20 of us or like 15 of us, and we're all sleeping on the ground. Some people sleep in tents. I sleep in a bedroll. So I just kick out a little thing on the ground and sleep on a mat with a blanket and in a sleeping bag or whatever. I don't sleep in a tent. And I wake up in the middle of the night, and I'm like really thirsty and want to go get some water. And I was like, man, I just really don't want to get out of bed. I'm really comfy. And I'm about to get out of my sleeping bag, and all of these wolves, like it had to be like a pack of like 20 something wolves, like all right around our camp, just start howling at the same time. Dude, I'm not even, just now it gives me chills like thinking about it. Dude. It's like the most terrifying thing, but it is also insanely cool. Like, you know, you're in nature, and it is a wild thing to be surrounded by a pack of wolves, and like they're all howling and shit. Like you don't think you're gonna die or anything, but fuck, you do get scared. And it's just nerve-wracking, but also you're like, man, I'm alive. Like I'm out here living it in the fucking mountains, like a real mountain man kind of thing. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah, dude. Some of the best stuff I've ever done in the States was like some of the stuff we did out in the wild in Colorado and Texas.
Yeah,
And
man.
like I definitely, you know, to a degree, I envy that little lifestyle that you live, bro. You know, you're out there doing some man shit, living in the wild. It's awesome, bro.
Yeah, and I was like actually just talking to my girlfriend about this in the last couple of days. I think it's going to be really healthy for me to just kind of disconnect, like off of social media, be offline for a while, be in the back country. Like it's real life. It's how humans were just meant to be. You know, I'm just also working a job, still connected with animals, and I feel like that once that's your calling, it's your passion. You're never going to leave it. It's just something that you're always going to want to be drawn back towards. And so, you know, as you know, working with dogs, you know, everything else after that, it's hard to imagine kind of doing something else. When you drop the leash, you work a desk job, you know, you'd be like, I used to be cool. You know, I used to work with dogs and like all this other stuff. And then now I'm, you know, selling fucking, I don't know, real estate or some shit, or working at a fucking phone place or something, you know, or a
Yeah,
coffee shop or whatever the fuck, you know, it's
I can
can't really do
see.
that when you've done some fun stuff.
Yeah, and it's still, you can go one way almost, but not the other. Like you could go from your gay ass fucking coffee barista job in, you know, California or whatever, to go and live a mountain man life. But like, I just couldn't see anyone going the other way. You know, like you know, all this
Yeah,
nature shit. I'd rather deal with just fucking rude people in the middle of a massive city making coffee instead. You know, it just wouldn't doesn't work
you
that way to
know,
me.
I know, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Like I live pretty far out from town, and so when I just go down to town to just get groceries, or or something, I have to run an errand or go to a hardware store, it's like I just run into some of the rudest people, and it's hard, honestly. Like after living such a remote life and being in the solitude in the wilderness, coming back to a city is, and I'm in Montana. The cities are small. I'm not talking
Yeah, I was
about
gonna
like
say it's not like
LA
LA.
or Dallas, Fort Worth, or San Antonio or San Diego or something. This is like, or Denver, Colorado. This is like small town Montana, and even then, it's still difficult for me to go to town. So, I totally agree with you. I think living the lifestyle that I have lived, it makes it harder coming back to town, but um, it does make you appreciate your life a lot
Yeah,
more, especially when you're doing something every day that is meaningful and impactful. Compared to I'm not discrediting anybody on like what they do for a living. You pick what you pick, and if you're happy with it, then that's the only thing that matters. And I'm happy doing what I do now. Which I will say, on a side point, I just want to make this known that ranching has been one of the most like gratifying things I have seen veterans uh, come to love. Like it is so like the military, but different. You're used to the suck and being in the field and taking stupid orders and getting piss poured rained on, and all you have is your stupid fucking tarp, and you're sleeping in a hole and all this other shit for little pay. That's like ranching in a nutshell. But in the military, you don't feel like it means anything. You know what I mean? You're just like, you're with your buddies and you're like, fuck, this blows. You're sitting in the trench or you're sitting in the fucking fighting hole with your stupid tarp on. It's piss pouring raining, and like, for what? You know what I mean? And then you come back home and get drunk. That's it. Like, or you deploy, and then then it actually means something. But
yeah,
when you get out, and this gets to my point, like you get out of the military and you lose that sense of direction, and you lose that sense of like camaraderie and belonging, and you're suddenly faced with this like monumental obstacle of like, what do I do with my life that I just worked this 4 years, this 5 years, this 8 years worth of time in the military to build something out of myself, and now all my skills are for nothing. And they're not. Like, you take all of these like baseline skills that you get from the military, like discipline and work ethic and being in the field, and you can endure the suck. You know what hardship is like. And ranching takes all of those things and accepts you for them, but then they give you this whole other set of skills that you never even knew were possible. But then every single part of it is like gratifying. Like going out and fixing a fence seems like such a simple task, but you're learning to fix this fence with some other buddies, and you're shooting the shit and talking about stuff and killing time. But then you're also like building this fence and taking the time to maintain it the right way, and so cows don't get out. And then like if a cow gets out and dies, like that's money out of the rancher's pocket. And then you're learning how to work with horses, animals. It's like such a human thing to want to work with animals in it, and it helps build trust and also build confidence in yourself and get rid of trauma, that a lot of guys have gotten over the years in the military, whether it's from deployments or things that have happened to them in their life. Something about working with a horse or an animal is just, it makes you so at peace. And like ranching gives you that. But then it's also the bigger picture too. Like we're talking about the beef industry. So, and I never knew all this. It took time for me to learn all this in the last 3 years, like, studying the beef market and cattle prices like per pound, and all the veterinary work that goes into cattle, and like me doing it all. And that's like being on a horse and roping a cow and learning how to tie off, and then go down there and draw up the right medication that doesn't kill it, but it makes it better, so that later on this rancher can make a profit off of it, and he's feeding his family, and you're also feeding America. It's like, it's such a service industry. It's a selfless thing to be a cowboy and work on a ranch. And it's like, the best word to describe it is like freedom. It just is like the most freeing feeling to be in the mountains riding a horse and working cows, and like, and it's just, you're seeing some of the most beautiful parts of the country, like some people have never even seen. And like, not to knock the show like Yellowstone or whatever, but they don't really describe that part of ranching and cowboying. The TV show is a drama,
Yeah.
It's not a documentary, but like, you know, if people really wanted to get educated and find out what cowboying is like, and if you're interested in it, even if you're a listener in Australia, I mean, lots of places are hiring folks to ranch, and they're so willing and receptive if you're a veteran, because they're like, oh fuck yeah, like you've served this country. And most ranchers are like really patriotic people, so they're like, oh fuck yeah, they love hiring veterans because they're like, oh, you served, you're you know, thank you for serving our country and like doing this, like let me offer you a job. But then it's also like they don't look at you as like some kid off the street with no skills, like the coffee person we're talking about. Like you come from the military that has like all this set of skills and disciplines and trades, and they're like, oh man, I don't see this regular person, I see somebody with a massive amount of potential that comes and works for me that can help me, and I'm happy to help that person, you know, work and make a difference and stuff. And that's probably the more important part, is like you're making a difference. And as veterans, I feel like most of us want to do that. That's why we served and did stuff, is to make a difference. And that industry is the most friendly industry I have come across in the veteran community, for sure. That tries to employ people and also help you just get somewhere. You know, like they'll take anyone off the street to just help them. But it's amazing. I just
Yeah.
had to go on a side tangent just to like say that for any of the listeners that are curious about that.
Now, and I think you raise a good point. And I've got to wrap this up in a minute. My little appointment thing just went before.
Sure
Um,
thing. Yeah.
but yeah, I think you raise a good point, mate. And it's a broader argument. Sorry, it's a broader conversation, which I've had several times. But I think a lot of times post military, post service, you know, police, law enforcement, whatever, people can often confuse the mechanism, which is say the military, with the outcome that they want, or the thing that they value. And I think a lot of people value service above self. They value community, meaning, contribution, that type of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I think some people don't realize that the military does that, but it's just a mechanism. It's just one mechanism. Police do it as well. So does the ambulance, you know, so
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
ranching. Like you've just kind of find like, what's the thing, what's the vehicle, the mechanism that's going to give you the satisfaction, that's going to scratch that itch for you. And for one point for you, it was the Marine Corps, and then it wasn't anymore. And then it was contracting, and then it wasn't contracting, and then now it's ranching.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a good summary. Sorry, that's a good point that you made in terms of like what you get out of ranching.
Yeah, it's all what you make it, you know. And I'm also not saying that like you can work for one ranch and it's going to be the best thing in the fucking world. I've also worked for some outfits that downright just fucking suck, and I quit and worked for somebody else. So, but I will say it has been uh up to this point in my life one of the most gratifying things that I've done. So it's a selfless thing. You don't make a lot of money doing it, but it is, if you want to feel gratified in life and have a purpose, like it does a really good job at that, for sure.
Yeah, I love it, man.
And you get to work with animals again. So I know that this whole podcast is called the Origin Canine Podcast. We're supposed to be talking about dogs, not ranching and cattle and stuff like that. But you know, dogs do tie into this as well, because you know you have cattle dogs that are working in this industry just as hard as you would work, you know, any other dog in, you know, law enforcement or military or whatever, hunting bird dogs, you know, and stuff. Like, yeah, cattle dogs have their absolute place in the canine world, in the working dog industry. And I have honestly seen some things I never even thought were possible with dogs in working cattle. Like, I mean, I'm talking people using different tones of a whistle with their mouth that will change what the dog does. And if there are some listeners here that know anything about cow dogs or herding dogs or shepherd dogs, anything like that, they don't have to be with cattle. They can be with sheep or goats or something like that. They're working these dogs like they're just thinking it, and the dog is doing it, and they're doing it like to the most razor's edge, like pinpoint thing. Excuse me. And everybody knows here, the one thing we love seeing as dog handlers is like watching a dog work on its own. And these dogs also do that. And it's the coolest thing ever to watch. I mean, it's like, yeah, to tie in the ranching thing and canine in this whole podcast, like it's another really cool element that ties into this line of work in this industry. So, I mean, I guess you can say to a degree, like I am still working with dogs. I'm just working in like a different way now because like I do work with the rancher's dog, and he follows me around and I give him commands like when I'm on the horse, and he works the cows and stuff for me and everything. But
Yeah. And
really
look,
cool stuff.
at the end of the day, mate, this podcast is about people's human experience, and sometimes that's dogs, sometimes it's not. A lot of the times we don't get into the weeds about the dog stuff. It's just about, sometimes you talk about divorces and mental health or like combat stuff or whatever. So
Sure. Yeah.
yeah. But dude, I hate to have to fucking knock this thing on the head, mate. But I've got to get going. I've got some people coming over. But hey, bro, I'm so glad we finally worked this out. I take full credit for this thing happening. And
no, it was
thanks
bound to happen. Living on the opposite end of the earth on two different continents with two different time zones. It's you'd think after being deployed a couple times we'd have this thing figured out on the time zone shit, but whatever. I'm really stoked that we were able to connect and make this happen. And I have to say thank you so much for having me on your podcast as a guest and being able to talk about this. I haven't really had a professional setting sit down and talk about my canine career with anybody. So I would really kind of say this is the first time I've been able to do that. So thank you again for having me on your podcast.
Right. You are very welcome, man. So we'll wrap it up there. But yeah, thanks, man.
Right on.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of the Origin Canine podcast. Tune in next week for another episode. In the meantime, go to origincanine.com, check out our safe, innovative, and built-for-purpose canine equipment.